The day it happened was a Thursday. I remember that specifically, because Thursdays in my week are always inspection report days, which means I spend the morning at a desk instead of in the field, and I hate sitting at desks, so by the time afternoon comes around I'm always slightly itchy and irritable in a way I can't explain to people who don't spend most of their working life underground. There's something that happens to your body when it's used to moving through spaces, and then you make it sit still for 6 hours. You feel it in your shoulders, mostly. A kind of low-grade restlessness that doesn't go away until you're back in the tunnel with a flashlight and something to fix. I'd driven up to the regional DOT office in the morning for the quarterly review. Nothing unusual about the meeting. Budget figures, deferred maintenance lists, a 15-minute argument about whether the South Bore's emergency lighting needed full replacement or just the damaged sections, which I won because I had the inspection photographs and the other guy didn't. The drive home should have taken an hour and 20 minutes on a good day. The Kelton Pass Tunnel is 17 miles from the city center, and then I'm essentially home. Another 8 miles of county road, and I'm pulling into our driveway on Marsh Creek Road, where Donna would probably already have something in the oven, because she does that on Thursdays. She cooks on Thursdays, specifically because she knows I come home irritable from desk days. I hit the tunnel entrance at 4:19 p.m. I know that because I checked my phone at the toll booth. I remember thinking the traffic was heavier than usual for a Thursday. The northbound lanes were packed, people leaving the city in a hurry, which was unusual mid-afternoon, but I didn't think much of it. There was construction on the bypass route, I figured. That happens. People flood the tunnel when the bypass is slow. I was in the South Bore, which is the bore I know better than any other physical structure on Earth. I've been maintaining this tunnel for 11 years. I know the exact location of every drainage sump, every cable tray, every ventilation shaft junction. I know the internal diameter of the primary supply ducts. I know which sections of roadway have micro-cracking that looks worse than it is, and which sections look fine but have rebar issues underneath. I know which emergency phones still work, and which ones have corroded contacts. I know that the lighting in the 4th illuminated zone flickers slightly when the temperature differential between the bore and outside hits more than 22 degrees, because the conduit has a minor twist in it that compresses when the concrete expands. That knowledge is the only reason any of us got out. I was at mile marker 1.1 when traffic stopped completely. Not slowed down. Stopped. Full stop. Engines idling. Nobody moving. Mile marker 1.1 of 2.3. Just past the midpoint. Which meant I was roughly 0.58 miles from the north exit and 1.1 miles from the south entrance. In a space with 2 lanes of traffic in each bore. The South Bore runs westbound. I'm talking about the tube of concrete and rock that I've crawled through in every configuration you can imagine. In maintenance coveralls at 2 a.m., with a leaking water main overhead. In full respiratory gear when a truck caught fire near the east portal. In darkness when we killed the main lighting during a cable replacement. I turned off my truck radio and rolled down the window. You do that instinctively when you can't see why traffic stopped. You listen for something that'll tell you what's happening ahead. What I heard was other engines idling. Some horns. Someone ahead talking. Not yelling, just talking loudly in the way people do when they lean out their windows to speak to the car in front of them. Normal traffic stop sounds. Then I heard something less normal. It came from the direction of the south entrance. Behind me. A sound that I identified first as an accident. The specific thumping and skidding sequence of a rear-end collision. But it didn't resolve into silence the way collision sounds do. It kept going. A kind of broken rhythm, a series of impacts that didn't have the clean mechanical cause and effect of one car hitting another. More irregular, more, I'm going to use the word organic, and you're going to understand why that word bothered me. I got out of my truck. I know that sounds like the wrong move. In retrospect, it seems obvious that you'd stay in the vehicle. But I'm a tunnel maintenance engineer, and this is my tunnel, and there is a specific protocol when you detect an unusual sound event inside a bore. You investigate, you identify the source, you call it in. That protocol is 11 years of conditioning, and it overrode every other instinct I had. I walked back along the shoulder toward the sound. 100 feet, maybe. far enough to see past the curve in the bore where the southbound lanes disappear around the gradual left bend near the 1.4-mile mark. What I saw was a woman running. She was running in the roadway, between the stopped cars, coming north toward me. That's not in itself alarming. Maybe she was running to report an accident ahead, but she wasn't running in the way a person runs when they're going somewhere. She was running the way a person runs when they're coming from something. Arms not pumping right. Gait off, hitching on the left side. She was wearing a yellow cardigan, and she'd lost one shoe, and the one shoe she still had on her right foot was a flat, the kind with no ankle support, and it was slapping the road surface with every step in an irregular rhythm that I could hear clearly in the tunnel's acoustic environment. Behind her, there were 3 other people running the same way. That hitching, off-balance run. I want to be precise here because I think precision matters when you're trying to explain how you understood something. I've read accounts of this day from people who say they saw infected and immediately knew what they were looking at. That didn't happen with me. What happened with me was an engineering assessment. These 4 people all exhibit the same movement anomaly, which means the anomaly isn't individual injury, it's a shared condition. And the woman in the yellow cardigan is moving away from the 3 other people with urgency, which means she is afraid of them, which means they are a threat, and they are inside my tunnel. I turned around and walked back to my truck, quickly. I did not run. Running in the shoulder of a tunnel when the lanes are stopped can get you killed by a driver who opens his door. But I walked fast, and as I walked, I pulled out my phone and called my site supervisor. The call didn't connect. I tried again. Same result. In the tunnel, you get spotty coverage at best. There's a DAS system, distributed antenna system, that's supposed to extend carrier signal through the bore, but our DAS had been intermittently failing for 3 months, which was on my deferred maintenance list, which had been on my deferred maintenance list because the budget argument about the lighting kept eating the available allocation. So no phone. I got back in my truck. The woman in the yellow cardigan had reached the stopped cars and was moving between them, trying doors. I could see her through my windshield and my mirrors simultaneously. The 3 people behind her were maybe 40 feet back. The man directly behind her caught up to her between a gray SUV and a flatbed truck. I watched the driver of the flatbed get out, a big guy, 50-something, work shirt, trying to help, and the moment he stepped between the cars, one of the 3 runners turned toward him, fast. The pivot was not a normal human pivot. You know how people turn to face something. There's a slight hesitation in the body, a moment where the spine catches up to where the head went. This pivot had none of that. The head turned, and the body followed in essentially one motion. The flatbed driver stepped back. The runner stepped toward him. I honked my horn twice. The tunnel makes honking extraordinarily loud. It bounces off the walls and the ceiling, and it's almost painful at close range. And both the runner and the driver looked toward my truck. The driver used that half-second to retreat to his cab. The runner stood in the roadway looking at my truck with an expression that I am going to try to describe accurately. Blank. Not angry. Not aggressive. Not animal territorial. Just blank. The way someone looks when they're searching for something but their eyes haven't found it yet. It lasted maybe 3 seconds and then there was a sound. I don't know what sound. Maybe someone else's horn farther back. Maybe one of the other runners hitting a car. And the runner pivoted again, fast, toward that sound, and moved toward it. That was the first useful thing I learned about them. They go toward sound. I remember sitting in my truck for maybe 30 seconds, just thinking. And what I thought about was the ventilation system. The Kelton Pass Tunnel has a transverse ventilation system. Fresh air pushed in through supply ducts at road level. Exhaust air extracted through ceiling-level exhaust ducts. The supply fans and exhaust fans are controlled from 2 locations. The main control building at the north portal, and the backup panel in Maintenance Room C, which is an interior room built into the rock wall at approximately the 1.0-mile mark. Maintenance Room C is accessible from the tunnel via a standard steel door with a deadbolt keyed to my maintenance master key. I had my maintenance master key in my jacket pocket. The ventilation system in this tunnel also includes longitudinal jet fans, mounted at intervals throughout the bore. Those fans are designed for smoke control in fire events. They create directional airflow along the bore axis. In a fire, they push smoke toward the nearest portal so it doesn't blind trapped drivers. In a non-fire emergency, they can be used to create a strong headwind effect, literally blowing air along the tunnel length with enough force to make walking against it uncomfortable and disorienting. I thought, if I can get to room C, I can control the airflow. And if I can control the airflow, I have some leverage here. I turned on my hazard lights, which is another thing you do instinctively, and I got out of my truck. The honking had spread further back now. I could hear voices, people asking each other what was happening, someone shouting about calling 911, which wouldn't work in here without the DAS functioning. 3 cars ahead of me, a woman had gotten out of a silver sedan and was standing on her doorsill, trying to see over the stopped traffic. I noticed she was wearing scrubs, hospital green, the kind nurses wear, and she had short brown hair and glasses. I went to her car first. "Hey," I said. "Hey, get back in your car." She looked down at me. "What's happening?" "I don't know yet." "Get back in." "Is it an accident?" "My husband is going to." "Get in your car and lock your doors." I said it in a different tone that time, not louder, but more specifically directed at her, the way you talk to someone on a job site when there's a hazard they haven't seen yet. She got in. I moved to the next car. The guy in the blue hatchback was already on his phone, talking fast. I knocked on his window. He glanced at me with the irritation people have when you interrupt a phone call. I pointed at his door lock. He ignored me. I kept moving forward. The situation behind me was getting louder. Not the sounds of violence exactly, not screaming in the way you'd expect. It was more confused. A rising noise level, horns and voices, and one sound underneath it all that I couldn't categorize, a kind of wet, repeated thumping that I chose not to think too hard about. At mile marker 1.2, there was a gap in the traffic, a 4-car-length space where the vehicles in front had been moving and the ones behind had stopped, creating an opening in the line. Standing in that gap was a man in a trucker's cap with Coleman aggregates stitched on it. He was watching the commotion behind him, with his hands on his hips, and the steady, unfazed expression of someone who has seen enough road accidents to not panic at the first sign of one. "You know what's happening back there?" he said to me as I came up. "Not entirely. How far does this traffic stop go?" "Clear to the north portal last time I looked." I walked up. "Nobody knows anything. All the cars just stopped when the traffic stopped." He looked at me more carefully. "You with the tunnel authority?" I had my DOT badge on my lanyard still from the morning meeting. "Maintenance." "There's something wrong. There are people back there who are acting very strangely, and I need to get to a control room." "What's your name?" "Rhett Coleman. Retired. That's my pickup 3 cars back." "Okay, Rhett. I'm Nolan. I'm going to need you to stay calm, and I'm going to need you to help me." He looked at me for a moment with an assessment that I recognized, the appraisal of someone who has managed people on job sites and is evaluating whether the person in front of them knows what they're doing. "All right," he said. "What do you need?" That was Rhett. He decided in about 4 seconds, and he never changed his mind. I told him to stay where he was, watch what was coming from behind, and yell if he saw anything move faster than a walk. Then I went forward to find room C. The maintenance room is not visible from the roadway. The door is set into a recess in the wall, flush with the tunnel facing, painted the same gray as the tiles, with only the emergency placard above it and the standard safety yellow kick strip along the bottom, distinguishing it from the wall itself. I've opened that door probably 600 times. I could find it in actual darkness, which I've done. The key went in smooth. The room smelled like it always does. A specific combination of electrical equipment, cement dust, and a slightly sour undertone from the condensate drain that I'd been meaning to have cleaned out. I hit the light switch and the fluorescents came up stuttering, as they always do in that room, because the ballast is original to the 1994 installation, and I've been noting that on my inspection reports for 3 years. The control panel for Zone C ventilation takes up most of the back wall. It's a physical panel. Buttons, switches, indicator lights, the kind of system installed before everything moved to touchscreens and software interfaces. I know every component on it the way you know your own hands. I powered up the local supply fans first. Getting fresh air moving was the priority. If this turned into a long event, CO buildup from all those idling engines was going to be a serious problem within hours. The ventilation system isn't designed to compensate for fully stopped traffic indefinitely. It's calibrated for moving vehicles, and idling engines in a static column produce exhaust concentrations that exceed design parameters pretty fast. Then I looked at the blast door controls. The Kelton Pass tunnel has blast doors at 4 internal positions. These are not car-stopping barriers in the movie sense. They're full-bore closure panels, solid concrete and steel, hydraulically actuated, sunk into the tunnel walls during original construction, for the scenario where a hazardous material vehicle has an incident and you need to isolate a section. They take about 40 seconds to close. When closed, they form a sealed partition across the full-bore width, approximately 12 feet high and 30 feet wide. They have never been used in the 11 years I've been here, except for 2 planned tests. There are 2 blast doors in the south bore, one at mile marker 0.4, near the south entrance, and one at mile marker 1.6, between my position and the north exit. The 0.4 mile door would seal off whatever was coming from the south entrance. The 1.6 mile door would seal the north portion of the tunnel, keeping civilians who were ahead of me separate from what was behind me. I deployed the 0.4 mile door first. The control for it on my panel is a covered red switch with a safety catch. You have to flip up the cover, then hold the switch down for 5 seconds until the hydraulic actuators engage. There's a status indicator that starts yellow, goes to blinking red while the door is moving, and goes to solid red when the door is fully closed. I held the switch. Yellow, blink red, solid red. 43 seconds. Door closed. Whatever was at the south entrance was now on the other side of that barrier. I sat with that fact for a moment, sat with what it meant, that there were also people on the other side of that barrier. Civilians in their cars who'd been behind mile marker 0.4 when the door closed. I didn't know how many. I'm going to carry that with me for however long I continue to carry things. The 1.6 mile door I did not close immediately. Not yet. I needed to see what was ahead, needed to know if the situation was worse on the north side before I sealed myself into a section of tunnel with unknown quantities on either flank. I left room C, locked the door behind me. The key stays with me at all times. This is a maintenance protocol I'd followed since year 2, when a contractor left a room unlocked and 3 teenagers got in and scratched their names into the cable trays. It's the kind of protocol that suddenly has a different kind of urgency, and went back to where Rhett was standing. He hadn't moved. He was watching the activity behind us with his arms crossed. "People are getting out of their cars," he said. "They're coming this way. Some of them are running and some of them aren't. The ones that aren't running, do they look normal?" He looked at me sideways. "They do not." "Okay, here's what I've done. There's a blast door closed at about the 4/10 mile mark back. That should slow whatever's coming. What I need to know is what's ahead of us. I'll walk it with you." We went forward. Moving along the shoulder, past idling cars, past people who were leaning out windows and asking us what was happening. I gave the same answer to everyone. "I'm with the tunnel authority. There's a situation at the south end. Please stay in your vehicles," and kept moving. At mile marker 1.35, I found a man standing on the roof of his minivan. He was young, early 30s, suit jacket, the top button of his collar undone. He had his phone held over his head as if an extra 3 feet of elevation would improve his signal, which it wouldn't, but that's a logical response to the situation, even if it's physically incorrect. I asked him to get down, and he said something that I remember exactly. "I got 4 bars of 4G on my rooftop carrier last month, and that thing is only 4 feet taller than this van, so this should be equivalent, and I'm trying to call my wife." I told him I understood. I was also trying to reach my wife, and could he please get down, because I needed to ask him questions. He came down. His name was Garrett Fisk, he told me immediately, in the way of someone who is managing their own anxiety by establishing identity, by making themselves real to a stranger. 31. sales rep for a medical equipment distributor. On his way home from a client visit, same as roughly every person in this tunnel who'd had a normal Thursday and then didn't anymore. "What's at the north end?" I asked him. "I don't know. I just know nobody's moving." A guy near the front told me there's a truck jackknifed near the portal and some cars plowed into it when traffic stopped, so you can't get out that way. Has he seen infected people up there? People acting strange? Garrett looked at me with a specific expression. The expression of someone who has heard a word they were hoping not to hear. "What do you mean by infected?" "Moving wrong, not responding normally to people, going toward sounds." I saw something on my phone before I lost signal. Videos from downtown. People attacking people, like really badly attacking them. I thought maybe it was a gas leak thing, like brain chemistry, like what happened in Garrett. I used his name. "I need a yes or no. Did you see anyone like that near the north exit?" "No, not yet. But a guy up there said there were sounds." "What kind of sounds?" "From outside the north portal. He said it sounded like a lot of cars crashing, and then people yelling, and then nothing." I processed that. The north portal is where traffic exits onto the surface highway, a 6-lane merge zone with a service road on the east side. If there were cars crashed at the portal from both directions, plus whatever had been happening on the surface, then the tunnel was not a problem to escape from. The tunnel was quickly becoming the safest location in the region. A tunnel with no exits, with a controlled atmosphere, with maintenance infrastructure I understood completely. The thought arrived with a strange flatness, the way thoughts sometimes do when you recognize something you don't particularly want to recognize. We are probably safer in here than out there, right now, which means the goal is not escape. The goal is survive long enough for conditions on the surface to change. That's a different problem. I went back to room C. By this point, there were about 12 people gathered near the maintenance room door. Red had been joined by Garrett, who'd apparently followed us back despite being told to stay by his car. And they'd been joined by a woman in hospital scrubs who turned out to be a nurse named Judith Wren, the woman I'd seen standing on her doorsill earlier, and a teenage boy named Caleb who'd been riding with his grandparents, and whose grandparents were somewhere behind the 0.4-mile blast door, and who was carrying himself with the rigid stillness of someone trying not to completely fall apart. There were others. A man who introduced himself as Pete Galloway, a truck driver, heavy-set, wearing a flannel shirt with a rip in the left elbow, who'd been parked about a quarter-mile from the north exit before he walked back toward the action. A woman in a red windbreaker who never gave me her name, who stood at the back of the group and listened without contributing. A young couple, mid-20s, the woman visibly pregnant, 7 months maybe, whose names I eventually learned were Dennis and Faye. An older guy I'm going to call Walt because that was his name, Walt Brody, 52, retired deputy sheriff from Caldwell County, who had, he told me when the situation became clear enough to warrant it, his service pistol in a holster under his jacket. He'd retired with it legally, paid the conversion fee, kept his license current. I was glad to know that, and I was also immediately thinking about when that firearm would make things worse rather than better, because a single 9mm pistol is not a meaningful defense against multiple infected in a confined concrete space, but the sound of firing it would pull every infected within hearing range toward the noise. Sound. Again. Keep coming back to that. I unlocked room C and got everyone inside. It's not a large room, roughly 14 feet by 20 feet, with the control panel, 2 metal shelving units, an emergency cabinet on the east wall, and a concrete floor with a drain in the center. 14 people in that room was tight. I told everyone to stay against the walls. "There's a situation in the tunnel," I said. "I'm the maintenance engineer for this facility, which means I know how to operate this room. Here's what I know so far. There are infected individuals in the south section of this bore. I've closed the blast door at the 0.4-mile mark, which should prevent them from advancing for now. The north portal is blocked by crashed vehicles, which means we're not getting out that way tonight. What I need from all of you is calm and information. Has anyone had cell signal in the last 30 minutes? A few shakes of the head. Walt said he'd gotten a few seconds of connection about 20 minutes ago. Just enough to see a news notification that said, Emergency services were overwhelmed citywide. That was it. Okay, I said. So we're working with what we can directly observe. Garrett said, "What is this? What's the infection? What's it? How does it spread?" His voice was very level, which I respected, because I could hear how much effort the levelness was costing him. "I don't know," I said. "I genuinely do not know. What I know is that the affected individuals respond to sound, they move toward it, and they move in an uncoordinated way that suggests significant neurological disruption. Until we know more about transmission, I'm going to treat proximity contact as the hazard, and we're going to avoid it." Judith, the nurse, raised her hand slightly, an automatic gesture that made her look briefly like she was in a meeting. Bites. The videos I saw before I lost signal. It was bites. The infected were biting people. "That tracks with what I saw," Rhett said. He said it simply, with no additional emphasis, which was one of the things I was already learning to appreciate about him. "Bites, then," I said. "Okay, no one gets bitten. Let's talk about what we have. The emergency cabinet in room C. I'd actually restocked it myself 8 months ago during a compliance review. Standard tunnel emergency supplies. 2 full sets of fire-rated coveralls. 4 N95 masks, which were going to be useful, but not for the reason they were included. They were for smoke events. A first aid kit with a reasonably good inventory. 2 pairs of nitrile work gloves. A hand crank radio. 3 heavy-duty LED flashlights with fresh batteries. A 100-foot coil of rope that was there for the roof inspection harness system. A fire extinguisher that should have been serviced 6 months ago and wasn't. A laminated emergency procedure binder, and a set of maps. The maps were the most important thing in the cabinet, though nobody else knew that yet. They were inspection maps, full architectural drawings of the tunnel system, both bores, both maintenance corridors that run parallel to the bores, the access passages between them, the location of every room, every shaft, every emergency exit. The emergency exits were what I was focused on. The Kelton Pass tunnel has 3 emergency exits in each bore. These are not exits out of the mountain. The tunnel runs through a ridge section that's 240 feet of rock above the crown, so you can't exit through the top. The emergency exits in each bore connect horizontally to the parallel maintenance corridor, and the maintenance corridor has 1 emergency egress point at each end that surfaces to the hillside above the highway. Those egress points are reinforced steel doors set into the rock face. They're designed for maintenance personnel to exit the tunnel system if the portals are blocked during an emergency. One of those egress doors was at the north end of the maintenance corridor, which put it approximately 200 feet above and to the east of the highway surface, opening onto a service road cut into the hillside. From there you could get to a fire access road that ran along the ridge. It was not a convenient exit, but it existed, and it opened from the inside, without special tools, because emergency egress equipment by code has to be operable from inside without keys. I looked at the map for a long time. I looked at the position of my group relative to the south blast door. I looked at the service passages from the south bore into the maintenance corridor, and I noted that 2 of them were on my side of the door, which was useful, and I noted that 1 was on the other side of the door, which meant that if something could find that passage, it would be on my side of the barrier without going through the blast door. I folded the map and put it in my jacket pocket. "What are you thinking?" Red asked me quietly. He was standing just behind my left shoulder and watching my face. "I'm thinking we're okay for tonight if we're careful," I said. "Tomorrow's a different question." He nodded. He understood that I was giving him the short version, and he didn't ask for more in front of the others. The next thing I needed to do was get a count on supplies. Food and water. In room C, we had nothing relevant. The emergency cabinet had no food, just a small bottle of saline for the first aid kit. But there were vehicles out there. Every car in this tunnel was a potential pantry, because people traveling carry things. Road trip snacks, lunch leftovers, convenience store purchases, the crumbled granola bar that's been in the cup holder for 3 months. It wasn't a meaningful food supply, but it was better than nothing. And water. The tunnel has a drinking water line, a separate small diameter pipe that feeds the hand washing stations in the maintenance rooms. and the small utility sinks in both portals. The supply is a gravity-fed connection from a mountain spring collection tank that feeds the portal restrooms and maintenance areas. That line should still have pressure because the supply tank is passive, no pumps involved. I could check that. I also needed to understand what was happening on the other side of that blast door. Room C had a closed-circuit camera monitor, a small screen showing feeds from the 4 interior cameras in the south bore. Camera positions: portal entrance, south, mile marker 0.6, mile marker 1.1, mile marker 1.5. The 0.4 mile blast door was between the portal camera and the 0.6 camera, which meant I could see what was happening inside the sealed section. I turned on the monitor. The image was low resolution, infrared capable. In the green-gray of the night vision mode, because the lighting in the sealed section had failed, which I'll explain in a moment, I could see the interior of the tunnel between the blast door and the south portal. There were people in there. A lot of them. Some were in their cars, which I could tell because of the silhouettes in the windows and the occasional interior light. Some were standing in the road between cars. Some were moving, and from the way they were moving, that same hitching, sound-seeking quality, I knew they were infected. The lighting failure was because the main electrical feed for the south section runs through a junction box near the 0.3 mile mark, and that junction box is controlled by a thermal breaker that trips when the surrounding temperature drops below a threshold, a design quirk from the original installation that had always been on my list to address, and that had never mattered until right now, when it was making the camera feed difficult to interpret. I counted as carefully as I could. On the 0.6 mile camera, in approximately a 100-foot section of lit roadway before the light failed further south, I could see 9 infected individuals, moving, irregular, colliding occasionally with parked vehicles in a way that looked entirely without intention, like water finding its path. There would be more I couldn't see. There were also, almost certainly, people in those cars who weren't infected, trapped in vehicles, watching the same things I was watching, with no ability to call for help and no one coming for them. I sat with that fact too. The cameras show the sealed section, I said to the group. I was trying to decide how much to share and deciding that the answer was all of it, because the alternative, managing information, was going to break trust faster than the truth would. There are infected individuals in there. I can't tell you the exact count. There are also civilians in their vehicles who are probably uninfected. I can't reach them right now. "Can you open the door?" the woman in the red windbreaker said. She'd moved to the front. My mother was in the car behind me when traffic stopped. I looked at her. "What's your name?" "Angie." "Angie, I understand. I'm going to be honest with you. If I open that door right now, everything in that section comes through into this section, and I lose the only control barrier I currently have. I can't open the door yet." She looked at the floor. She didn't argue. "I'm going to try to find a way to help the people in there," I said. I promise that. I meant it when I said it. I still mean it. I just couldn't do it that night. The time was, by Garrett's phone, which had battery remaining even without signal, 5:47 p.m. We'd been in the tunnel for 1 hour and 28 minutes. I organized supply runs. Not everyone could go. I needed people in room C. I needed someone on the camera monitor, and I needed Caleb to stay put, because he was 16, and he was right at the edge of operational, and the best thing for him was to have a task that didn't involve exposure. I put Caleb on the monitor and showed him what to watch for. He took it seriously. He was a serious kid. Rhett came with me. Walt came, and I asked Walt to carry his pistol visibly, not because I wanted to use it, but because the weight of authority that comes from visible hardware would be useful if we encountered anyone who needed to understand quickly that we were organized. Judith came for the medical assessment angle. She was the most qualified person we had to evaluate injuries or symptoms in people we encountered. We worked from my truck out. I had a vehicle, which meant I had access to the work bag I always carry in the bed, a tool roll with standard maintenance hand tools, an electrical testing kit, 2 pairs of work gloves, a spare battery pack for flashlights, my PPE kit, a 1-gallon water jug, half full, and a lunch bag with the remains of the sandwich I'd made that morning, and a bag of pretzels that I immediately wished was more. I also had, in the cab, what every tunnel maintenance engineer in the state is required to carry in their DOT vehicle: a road emergency kit, reflective triangles, a proper first aid kit, emergency flares, a hand pump siphon, a length of jumper cable, a fire suppression blanket. That siphon was going to matter later. We moved forward through the stopped cars. Some drivers were still in their vehicles, windows up, locked. Some had gotten out and were standing in clusters. As we moved, Rhett spoke quietly to everyone in a range of about 6 car lengths on either side. Calm, authoritative, short sentences. Stay in your vehicle, lock your doors. Someone's working the problem. Don't make excessive noise. He was good at it, better than I was. I'm better with equipment than with people, which is not a great characteristic for the situation I was in, but you work with what you have. In 40 minutes of systematically checking vehicles, tapping on windows, speaking to drivers, accepting whatever food and supplies people could contribute, we assembled 11 bottles of water of various sizes, a 12-pack of Gatorade, 4 granola bars, a bag of trail mix, a 6-pack of peanut butter crackers, individual packets, 3 apples, a banana, an unopened bag of potato chips, a bag of beef jerky, 2 protein bars, a can of Pringles, a box of crackers, and what turned out to be a full bag of fast food, someone's dinner order from a drive-thru, 2 burgers and a large order of fries, still warm. There were also 4 prescription medications in individual bottles that Judith collected and assessed for relevance. She explained each one to me. An anticoagulant belonging to an elderly man named Bernard in a Dodge sedan. Critical. We needed to keep that person medically monitored. A thyroid medication. A benzodiazepine for anxiety. She set that aside separately and said it might be medically necessary for someone by morning if the situation didn't improve. An asthma inhaler. We brought all of it back to room C. While we were moving through the cars, I was also doing a parallel assessment of what I could hear. The acoustic environment in the tunnel is specific, and I know it well. The constant base-level sound in a normally operational tunnel is the ventilation hum, a low-frequency, even pressure sound you stop consciously registering after about 5 minutes, but that's always there. With the fans running, that was present. On top of it, idling engines, the occasional conversation, a child crying somewhere in the stopped traffic ahead, and from the direction of the south blast door, a sound that I recognized after the second pass. Impact. Irregular. Repeated. Not pounding. Not the frantic organized pounding of a person trying to get through a door. Irregular. Random. Without rhythm or intent. The sound of something encountering an obstacle, and not understanding it as an obstacle. Just running into it. Backing away. Running into it again. The blast door is 18 inches of reinforced concrete and steel. It was not going to budge, but I noted that the impacts were not diminishing, meaning the sources of the sound hadn't moved away. They were remaining near the door. Near sound. That again. The ventilation fans were making noise, so the infected were clustering near the blast door because the fans were making noise through the vent openings. I was drawing them with the very system I needed to run to keep the air quality viable. That was a tension I was going to have to manage. I went back to the control panel. In a normal tunnel fire event, you'd kill the supply fans to prevent feeding oxygen to a fire, and use the exhaust fans to pull smoke out. In this situation, I wanted air quality, but I didn't want to be a sound beacon. The supply fans for the south section were already off. They were on the other side of the blast door. What I had running were the fans for the center section, zones C and D, which covered the space from mile marker 0.4 to 1.6. My group was in zone C. I reduced the supply fan speed from 100% to 40%. The air quality was still going to be manageable at that speed. I did the rough mental math, and with idling engines in approximately 60 vehicles in my section and 14 people contributing to CO2 levels, 40% fan speed would keep us inside OSHA safe limits for the next 8 to 12 hours, depending on how many of those vehicles got turned off. Quieter. Less beacon. Then I thought about what else might be working as a sound source. And I thought, every car radio that's still powered on, every phone playing a notification, every open car stereo, every alarm. The tunnel's acoustic environment was a complex echo chamber that would carry a phone ringtone for 200 feet without diminishing. I went back out with Garrett. I chose Garrett because he was analytical and thorough, despite being scared, and because moving helped him. And we walked the entire section, asking drivers to turn off engines and kill all sound sources. Some people did it immediately. Some people argued. One man, in a lifted pickup with Psalm 91:7 on a window decal, told me he was going to run his engine as long as he wanted, because this was his vehicle, and I had no authority over him. And I told him that was absolutely correct, and that I hoped he understood that the exhaust from his running engine was making everyone in the tunnel progressively more likely to lose consciousness within the next hour, and he could do whatever he chose with that information. He turned off his engine. People respond to specificity. Vague danger is abstract. Specific physiological consequence is real. By 8:30 p.m., we had most vehicles off. The tunnel was significantly quieter. The sound from the direction of the south blast door had diminished. Not gone, but less frequent. The impacts were maybe one every 20 seconds instead of continuous. I walked back to the south blast door and stood about 30 feet from it and listened. The door is a solid panel. There's a gap at the base, tolerance for hydraulic cycling, of maybe half an inch. Through that gap I could hear something, not the impacts, something else. A sound that I'm going to describe as breathing, but not normal breathing. The rhythm was wrong, too fast, and there was a quality to it that I don't have a precise word for. Wet, as though the passages that air was moving through weren't clear. I crouched down and shone my flashlight through the gap. I could see the road surface on the other side, gray concrete, tire tread marks, and a foot, a shoe, a woman's flat, pale blue, with a broken buckle on the strap. The foot attached to it was still, not moving. Just there, about 2 feet from the door on the other side. I stood up. "What is it?" Garrett was behind me. "Nothing," I said. "Come on." I told myself. Get through tonight. Get through tonight, and then make decisions. Back in room C, I distributed the food. 14 people, various quantities, trying to be fair. The pregnant woman, Faye, got first consideration. Her husband Dennis was trying to be calm and doing a poor job of it, which I recognized as his own version of what Garrett was doing, the management of fear through visible composure. Caleb got a protein bar and the bag of beef jerky because he was a teenager and he was running on empty in more ways than one. I ate half the sandwich that had been in my truck. I drank a third of a bottle of water. I ate 4 pretzels. Rhett sat next to me on the floor with his back against the wall and said, quietly, "What's the actual plan?" "There's an emergency exit," I said, "in the maintenance corridor that runs parallel to this bore. It's accessible through service passages from the roadway. I know where it is. I know how to get there." "What's the catch?" "The service passages. There are 3 of them between here and the north end, plus 2 behind the south blast door. I need to assess which ones are sealed and which ones are open. If any of the passages are unsealed, anything in the sealed section can come through them without going through the blast door." He was quiet for a moment. "How many of those passages are sealed?" "I don't know yet. It depends on whether the inspection protocol from 6 months ago was followed. It should have been. I checked it myself. Should have been. Yeah." We sat in that for a moment. "And the surface?" he said. "I don't know what the surface looks like. The report from the front of the convoy, that guy who heard sounds outside the north portal, that's all I have. It could be manageable, could be worse than this. And if it's worse than this, then we stay here and wait for conditions to change. The tunnel's infrastructure can support a small group for longer than you'd think if we manage it carefully." I was talking faster than I usually talk, I noticed. That was the stress coming through in the way it always comes through for me. Not in panic, but in the accelerated production of information. I slow myself down deliberately. "First priority tonight is water. I need to check the utility line pressure." Second priority is reducing our audible footprint. Third priority is sleep. We need people rested. Rhett looked at me with something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite respect. Somewhere between the two. You're good at this. I'm good at the tunnel, I said. The people part I'm figuring out. He nodded. I'll handle the people part. You handle the tunnel. That was, functionally, what we agreed to that first night. The utility water line had pressure. I found the tap in room C's utility sink and let it run for 30 seconds. There was discoloration from the line sitting dormant, slight rust tinge from the pipe walls, but it cleared and ran clean. I tasted it. Fine. Better than fine, actually. Cold and clean the way mountain spring water is. I told everyone it was potable and showed Judith where the tap was so she had access. Water was not going to be our limiting resource, at least not immediately. Food was. I estimated our current food supply, roughly counting calories in a way that's imprecise but directional, and I was looking at maybe 12 to 1,500 calories of total available food for 14 people. That was going to last one day if we rationed it severely. After that, we were on vehicle pantries, which required going further out into the tunnel and approaching vehicles where people may or may not be cooperative. We also had vehicles with vending machine-style snack caches. I'm thinking specifically of Pete Galloway's truck cab, which he mentioned had a significant road snack collection because long-haul truckers eat constantly and always have more food than anyone expects. Pete was quiet most of that first evening, watching everything with his arms crossed and saying little. But when I asked him directly what he had in his cab, he became immediately useful. 3 1-liter water bottles, 2 large bags of beef jerky, a full sleeve of peanut butter crackers, a bag of mixed nuts, 5 individual packets of oatmeal, dry, 3 granola bars, and most usefully, 2 cans of food, a can of baked beans, and a can of soup, both pull-tab, that he'd had in his road bag for emergencies. He also had a camp stove in his sleeper compartment, small, butane-powered, with 2 fuel canisters attached. That camp stove was going to matter enormously. I added Pete's supplies to our inventory, thanked him, and he sat down on the floor of room C and said something that I've thought about several times since. My wife doesn't know where I am. He said it without self-pity, just as a fact, the way you'd note a piece of data that was relevant. I told him I understood, because I did. Donna was on the other side of this mountain at that moment, in our house on Marsh Creek Road, probably standing in the kitchen watching the news, probably trying to reach me on my cell phone. She would know the tunnel was on my route home. She would know to be worried. She'd have called my supervisor. She had his number. She'd had it since year 3 of my job when there was a pipe burst incident, and I'd been out of contact for 6 hours, and she'd decided never to be unprepared for that again. Donna is efficient in a crisis in a way that I think surprised her the first time she discovered it. She's a garden center manager. She manages 30 employees, a seasonal operation, an unpredictable supply chain, and the specific chaos of springtime customer behavior when everyone suddenly wants to plant things at the same moment. She knows how to triage, and she knows when to wait, and she knows when to act. She would be doing something productive right now. I'm glad she wasn't in this tunnel, and I'm glad she's competent, because there was nothing I could do from in here. Nothing at all. It was 10:15 p.m. when I allowed myself to stop and sit and feel that fact. Just for a few minutes, just sitting against the wall of room C with the hum of the reduced speed supply fan overhead and the sound of other people's uneasy breathing around me and the distant, intermittent impact sounds from the direction of the south door, thinking, Donna. Then I got up and checked the cameras again. The south section cameras showed the same green-gray landscape of stopped vehicles and moving shapes. I counted again, more carefully this time, watching each camera for 60 seconds and tracking the shapes that moved between positions. South portal camera, 5. The 0.6-mile camera, 11 visible in the lit section. The 1.1-mile camera, which was just behind the blast door, showed the door itself and the road surface and the foot in the pale blue shoe that hadn't moved, and something else on the 1.1-mile camera. A shape, seated, against the wall, not standing, seated, with their back against the south bore wall about 20 feet back from the blast door. In the very edge of the camera frame, barely visible. I watched it. For 4 minutes I watched it. It moved. A slight shift, head position changing. Then stillness. Then the shape raised one arm, slowly, and put it against the wall. The posture was completely unlike the erratic movement of the infected individuals. It was deliberate, purposeful. That was a person. A living, uninfected, conscious person sitting against the wall on the other side of the blast door. I leaned closer to the screen. The person's head turned toward the camera, just slightly, as if they'd noticed the camera housing, or as if they'd noticed the LED indicator light on the camera, which blinks green when the unit is active. I put my fist against my mouth and thought about what to do. Blast door. 11 infected visible in the lit section. Unknown number in the dark section. One conscious survivor near the door. There was no clean way to open the door. Not tonight. I didn't have the people or the plan. But leaving that person there. What do you see? Caleb was standing behind me. He'd been quiet so long I'd half forgotten he was still at the monitor station. I see someone, I said. Over there. He leaned in, looked at the screen. The seated figure had moved again slightly. They're alive. Yes. Can you get them out? Silence. Long silence. I don't know yet, I said. I'm going to try, but not tonight. He accepted that. He was 16, and he accepted it, which told me a lot about what the last few hours had done to his sense of what was possible. The rest of the first night was long, not eventful. Long in the way that confined spaces in the dark are long. Every hour felt extended, stretched out by the particular awfulness of having nothing useful to do. I kept people in room C because out in the tunnel was dark and noisy, with echoes, and the risk of panicked behavior was too high at 2 a.m. in a confined space. I ran a watch rotation. 2 people on the monitor, 2 people at the room C door with flashlights, and strict instructions to listen and report. 2 people resting. I was not among the resting group. Around 3 a.m., something changed with the blast door impacts. They stopped. Complete stop. No impacts. No sound through the gap at the base. I told Walt, who was on door duty with Judith, and we both stood outside room C in the dim light from the emergency panels and listened. Nothing. The normal tunnel sounds. Fan. The distant drip of groundwater seeping through a crack in the liner somewhere near the 1.7-mile mark. Ambient. But no impacts. Did they move away? Walt said. They might have. I thought about the cameras. Went back inside and checked. The 1.1-mile camera, the one covering the blast door, showed an empty road surface. The shape that had been seated against the wall was gone. I moved to the 0.6-mile camera. I counted 7 shapes moving in the roadway. Then to the portal camera. Only 2 near the entrance, both moving slowly. They've redistributed, I said. Something pulled them toward the south entrance. I thought about what that something might be. A sound from outside, from the surface. Something louder and more compelling than the diminished ventilation noise that had been drawing them to the door. I didn't know whether to be relieved or worried. I sat with the ambiguity. Rhett slept for 4 hours, then spelled me at 4:30 a.m. so I could sleep. I was on the concrete floor of room C, with a rolled-up emergency coverall as a pillow, and the camp stove's carrying case as a secondary support under my lower back, and I closed my eyes and went through the tunnel layout in my head. I do this the way some people count sheep. I walk through the space systematically, noting each junction, each room, each shaft. I was at the 1.6-mile mark in my mental walk when I fell asleep. I woke up at 6:47 a.m., Friday, March 14th, day 2. The first thing I heard when I woke up was the sound of the ventilation fan at reduced speed, which I'd expected. The second thing I heard was Rhett's voice, low and careful, saying, "Nolan." I sat up. The door. He nodded at the room C exit. There's something at the door. I was on my feet. The maintenance room door is steel, outward opening, with a small wire-reinforced glass window at approximately face height. I stood to one side of the window, not in front of it, and looked. The tunnel roadway visible through the window was dim, lit by the emergency lighting I'd switched to overnight mode, 40% illumination. In that dim light, about 12 feet from the door, there was a man standing in the road. He was wearing a gray jacket with a company logo on the chest that I couldn't read from this angle. He was standing still, not moving, just standing, facing the door. "Is he?" Garrett started. "I don't know," I said. The man in the gray jacket turned his head. One way, then the other, slow rotation, like he was listening. I didn't move. Nobody moved. We stayed silent. After 90 seconds of that, 90 seconds of him standing there turning his head, while 12 people in room C held their breath, the man took several steps to the left, stopped, turned his head again, then walked further left, toward the tunnel wall, and stood there pressing one shoulder against the wall in a posture that made no functional sense unless it was accidental, which I suspected it was. He was infected. He'd found his way into this section, between the south blast door and the 1.6-mile door, from somewhere. I hadn't closed the 1.6-mile door yet because I'd needed to know what was ahead of us first, which meant he'd come from the north section. There was infected in the north section. That changed the geometry of the problem significantly. I had infected behind a blast door at my back, infected now apparent in front of me, and my group in a maintenance room between those two positions. The service passages to the maintenance corridor, my emergency route, were threaded through both sections. I closed the 1.6-mile blast door. Right then, from the panel in room C, yellow light, blink red, solid red, 43 seconds, and my section was now sealed between the two doors, which meant I had committed us to this specific 1.2-mile section of tunnel until I had a different way out. The man in the gray jacket reacted to the sound of the hydraulic actuators engaging. He pivoted, fast, that characteristic fast pivot, toward the control room, toward us. He moved toward the door. Everyone in room C saw this. The group's anxiety, which had been managing itself at a fragile equilibrium through the long night, shifted a degree in a direction I didn't like. "He can't get through that door," I said clearly. "The door is steel, with a keyed deadbolt. He does not have the capacity to operate a door lock. He can't get in." I was watching through the side of the window frame as I said this. The infected man reached the door. His hands came up and made contact with the surface, and he began making impact motions. Not a knock, not a pound. The same blind, random contact as the sounds I'd heard at the blast door through the night. Hands hitting steel. The sound was loud in the concrete environment. "He's going to draw more," Walt said. "Yes, we need quiet." I looked at the room. "I mean, we all need to be completely silent. No talking. No movement near the door, if you don't need to be there. Give him nothing to track, except what he's already found." The man outside the door hit the steel for 11 minutes. I know this because I timed it on Garrett's phone clock while we all stood or sat in absolute stillness. 11 minutes, and then he stopped. And then the sound of his footsteps receded, going north, pulled by something. Someone who wasn't in room C had made a sound somewhere in the tunnel. I had civilians out there, scattered through 50-odd stopped vehicles, who didn't know the rules yet, who might be talking normally, opening and closing car doors, playing phone audio, doing anything. "I need to go out there," I said. "I'll come," Rhett said immediately. "No, stay here. If I don't come back in 40 minutes, I need you to find the map." I tapped my jacket pocket and looked for the service passage at mile marker 0.8. That's the closest route to the maintenance corridor from our position. In the maintenance corridor, head north. The egress door is at the north end of the corridor. It's a red steel door, combination exit, no key needed from the inside. He looked at me like he was memorizing a phone number. 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I went out. The tunnel in the emergency lighting mode is an eerie environment. You know how LED lights throw hard shadows? In a space this regular, the same geometry repeating for 2.3 miles, the same light positions at intervals, the same wall and ceiling and floor. The shadows are identical copies of each other disappearing into the distance. You look down the bore, and it looks infinite. the same cross-section repeated like a corridor in a bad dream. I moved slowly, one hand on the wall, listening for footsteps that weren't mine. The man in the gray jacket had gone north, toward the 1.6-mile blast door. I was going to stay away from that area. I went south instead, down to mile marker 0.8, where the nearest service passage was. It was a plain door, slightly different from the room C door, narrower, lower, the standard maintenance corridor access type. I opened it with my master key. Inside, a 4-foot-wide passage, concrete walls, overhead conduit, that specific darkness of spaces that never have occupancy lighting. My flashlight lit it up. I followed it. The passage runs from the roadway to the maintenance corridor and is approximately 25 feet long. At the far end, another door, the maintenance corridor side. This one opened onto the corridor. I stood in the corridor for a moment. It's a smaller space than the main bore, 6 feet wide, 8 feet high, no lane markings, utility conduit, and cables running along the walls. A dirt and aggregate floor from when the last section was laid. Cool, slightly damp, no sound except for water. No infected in the maintenance corridor. Not here, not yet. I looked north. The passage to the north egress door was approximately 1.4 miles of maintenance corridor. I couldn't walk all of that right now, but I could confirm the corridor was clear from here to the next service passage junction, which I did. I went about 200 feet north, flashlight sweeping, listening. Nothing. The corridor was clear. I came back through the service passage into the tunnel. Over the next 2 hours, I moved through the stopped vehicles in our section and established contact with as many civilians as I could reach. The process was the same each time. Approach carefully. Make eye contact through glass before tapping. Signal them to crack the window only. Speak quietly. Convey the rules. Stay quiet. No engines. No phones on full volume. No talking above a murmur. What do you have in terms of food and water? Here's where you can find help. I found 37 people in the vehicles in my section. 37 uninfected survivors between the 2 blast doors, plus my room C group of 14. 51 people total. Among them were things that mattered. A type 1 diabetic, college-aged, a woman named Morgan, who had insulin in a cooler bag, and enough supplies for 4 more days, which was going to become a critical timeline. A man, elderly, I'm guessing 75, named Bernard, who I recognized from his Dodge sedan, and who had the anticoagulant Judith had already cataloged. A family of 4 with a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. Children were going to be noise challenges. A man who turned out to be a high school chemistry teacher named Tom Barker, which I noted for the potential usefulness of general science knowledge in improvised contexts. A woman who was a veterinarian, name of Annie Pleck, who had a large animal field kit in her SUV, the kind of kit that contains sutures, antiseptics, injectable sedatives, and other supplies that Judith immediately assessed as significant. A man who would only say his name was Dex, and who smelled like he'd been drinking, and who I left in his car after confirming he was not injured and not infected. I asked everyone about sounds. What had they heard? What was happening near the north portal? The consistent picture that emerged. At the time traffic stopped, there had been sounds outside the north portal. Vehicle impacts, crowd noise, then nothing. No sounds from the north portal since then. Either whatever was outside had moved away, or it was present but quiet. The few people at the front of the convoy, closest to the 1.6-mile door that I'd now closed, reported they'd heard someone moving in the tunnel in the early morning hours. The infected man in the gray jacket, probably. By mid-morning on day 2, I'd managed to bring the entirety of the civilian population in my section into a loosely organized understanding of the situation. Room C was headquarters. People brought their food contributions to Room C. Judith set up a medical station in the Room C space, examining anyone who had potential injuries or exposure concerns. Walt stationed himself as a visible authority figure near the Room C door, which was both useful and slightly concerning to me given the firearm factor, but his manner was calming rather than threatening. I went back to the cameras. The south section showed fewer moving shapes. 12 visible, distributed. The one that had been seated near the door was gone from the 1.1-mile camera. It was a different camera angle now, because I'd adjusted the 1.1-mile camera remotely to cover the service passage doors at 0.6 and 0.85 miles, which are both in the south door sealed section. The passage at 0.85 miles was one I was worried about. The passage at 0.85 miles on the south section was on my deferred maintenance list. Specifically, the door's frame had warped slightly in a ground movement event 18 months ago, and the door no longer seated fully flush with the frame. There was a gap at the top right corner, maybe 2 inches. I'd flagged it for repair. Repair had been scheduled. Budget meeting had postponed it. 2 inches. At head height if you were in the maintenance corridor. Enough for sound to travel through from the main bore into the corridor. If anything in the sealed section found that passage gap and understood it as a sound entry. No, they don't understand anything. That's the key thing I kept reminding myself. They go towards sound. They don't open doors. They don't problem solve. They're not planning. But they will cluster near something that transmits sound, and a clustered group of infected pressing against a warped door frame is a different mechanical problem than a single one pressing against a sound door. I needed to get to that passage from the maintenance corridor side and assess the seal. To get to it, I'd need to go through the service passage at 0.8 miles into the corridor, then south along the corridor to the 0.85-mile passage junction. I'd need to do it quietly, and I'd need to do it without knowing what was on the other side of that warped door. I told Rhett the plan. "I'll go," Rhett said. "I need to go. I know what to look for. You know the tunnel, but you've been awake since 4:30 yesterday afternoon, and it's 9 in the morning. That's," he counted, 16 and a half hours. "You need another set of eyes." "Fine," I said. "You and me." We move quietly. We assess the passage from the corridor side. If the door looks like it's going to fail, we reinforce it and come back. What do we reinforce it with? I looked at the room. Thought. The shelving units in room C were bolted to the wall, but could be unbolted. Horizontal steel strapping, roughly 2 inches by a 1/4 inch, 12 feet long. Not ideal, but workable as a brace against a door that was being pushed from the other side. I'd need to cut it, and I'd need some way to secure it. "I've got tools in my truck," I said. "Come with me first." From the truck bed, angle grinder, battery-powered, charge unclear, bolt cutter, 2 adjustable wrenches, a drill, battery, also unclear charge, a socket set, a steel chisel and hammer. I took all of it. It was heavy. I carried it. At the 0.8-mile service passage, I unlocked the door, held it for Rhett, locked it from the inside, into the maintenance corridor, south, moving carefully, both of us staying to the center of the corridor to minimize any scuff noise against the wall. 40 meters south, 50. The 0.85-mile junction was a T intersection in the corridor, one branch going east into the service passage for the south bore. We stood at the junction and listened. Silence from the service passage. No sound penetrating. I moved to the service passage door, crouched, looked through the gap at the top right corner of the frame. Dim. The emergency lighting in the south bore on that section was still partially working. There was enough light that I could see down the passage to the south bore end. The door at the south bore end was closed. But, at the base of the south bore end door, in the slim gap at the base, something was visible. Dark, irregular, not a static shape, moving. I motioned Rhett to stay where he was. I pressed my ear against the corridor door and listened. Through the gap at the top right corner, very faint, the same wet breathing, the same irregular rhythm. Something was directly on the other side of the south bore service passage door. The warped frame gap was at my end, the maintenance corridor end, which meant sound from the south bore could travel through the passage and through this gap, which meant that something on the south bore side of the passage was clustering there because of sounds from the corridor. The corridor had been silent. So what sounds were they tracking? I thought the service passage itself has a slight draft, air moving through it from bore to corridor, due to the pressure differential created by the ventilation fans. That airflow creates a very slight sound, a faint whistle through the 2-inch gap at the corridor end. a constant, soft frequency. They could hear that. Faint as it was, they could hear it, and they'd clustered at the door where the sound was coming from. I needed to block the gap. I had the steel strapping. I needed to cut a piece to span the gap and use the drill to secure it to the frame. But the drill and the grinder would make noise. Significant noise. The kind of noise that would bring everything in that passage corridor surging against the south bore door. This is the moment where I made what I think was a good decision, but that cost something. I went back to the junction, back north, and used the hand crank from my tool bag to manually operate the ventilation bypass valve at the corridor junction box. The bypass redirected airflow away from the 0.85-mile service passage, equalizing the pressure on both sides. The whistle stopped. I waited. 2 minutes. 3. The sound of movement at the south bore door of the service passage faded. I could hear through the gap. It was there, then it wasn't, then intermittently, receding. They were moving away from the door. No whistle, no sound, nothing to track. I went back to the gap, listened. Nothing directly at the door now. Now, I said to Rhett, quietly. Not a whisper. Whispers carry in concrete differently than low speech, but quiet. We used the drill as fast as I could manage. I'd pre-cut the strapping in the corridor using the angle grinder. We were 40 meters from the south bore, and I'd reduced the grinder contact time to under 8 seconds with a clean cut. The drill was louder and longer. 4 holes, 4 screws. The steel plate over the gap. 22 seconds of drilling sound. During those 22 seconds, I heard movement in the service passage. The sound of something in the passage, moving toward us, drawn by the drilling noise. By the time the last screw seated, the sound was at the south bore door of the passage, pressing against it. The door held. It had held before, and it held now, but it was louder than it had been. We got out of the corridor. I locked the 0.8-mile service passage behind us. Back on the tunnel road, in the dim emergency lighting, with the sound of impacts on the service passage south door fading back into the base-level noise of the bore. That happened on the morning of day 2. The afternoon of day 2 is when things went wrong. It started with Garrett. Not his fault, or not entirely. He'd been awake for most of the night, which meant his judgment was impaired in the way that 20-plus hours of wakefulness impairs judgment, and he'd been talking to 2 other men in the tunnel, a guy whose name I never got, late 30s, biker jacket, who'd been riding a motorcycle that was now parked between 2 SUVs near mile marker 1.3, and a man named Kevin Straw, 46, who had a wife and daughter with him in his car, and who had been increasingly panicked since morning. These 3 men had been talking for hours. I heard fragments of their conversation when I moved through that section, and what they'd been talking about was the service passages, and what they led to, and whether anyone had actually checked the north section of the tunnel for a way through. I'd told Garrett about the maintenance corridor plan. I'd been clear that it required coordination and preparation. I'd been clear about the passage at 0.85 miles, and why we'd just reinforced it, and why moving through the service passages without knowing what was on the other side was dangerous. Garrett heard all of that. And then the 3 of them located the service passage at mile marker 1.4, which is between my position and the 1.6-mile blast door, which is in the north section, which I had sealed. The passage at 1.4 miles had been on my inspection last autumn, and was fully sealed. Good door, good frame, the one I had the least concern about. The lock on that door was standard maintenance corridor lock. My master key operated it. Garrett's group didn't have my master key. They had a tire iron from the motorcycle. I was in room C when I heard the sound. A specific metal contact sound. Not a knock, not an impact. The specific rhythm of someone working a leverage tool against a door frame, trying to pop the lock catch. I knew what it was, immediately, because it's the sound of the same process I've seen maintenance contractors use when they've lost a key and need access. Pull out, pry, reset, pull out. I ran. The time from the sound to my reaching mile marker 1.4 was approximately 90 seconds, which was long because I was moving quickly but still controlled, because running in that environment with its acoustics would have been its own problem. I came around the vehicles in the roadway and saw the 3 men at the service passage door. The tire iron was wedged between the frame and the door. The lock catch had given way. These doors aren't designed for serious forced entry resistance. They're internal maintenance doors, not security barriers. And the door was open. Open 4 inches. Through those 4 inches, darkness and the particular cold air of the maintenance corridor. "Stop," I said. Garrett turned. His face was complicated. Guilt and determination mixed together. The expression of someone who knew they'd done something wrong and had decided it was worth it. "We're just checking what's there. You said there's a way out through there. Close the door." I was looking at the opening. 4 inches. The corridor behind it was dark and quiet. "Close it right now." "We haven't seen anything. There's nothing in there. We already looked." "You looked for 4 inches. I've got a flashlight." Kevin Straw pushed the door further open and shone his light in. The corridor lit up for 15 feet of visible length. Empty. Nothing visible in that 15 feet. But 15 feet wasn't the corridor. The corridor was 2.3 miles long, and they were looking at 15 feet of it, and whatever I couldn't see in the dark beyond that flashlight beam could see the light, could hear the door, could. Something ran into the edge of the flashlight beam, fast, low to the ground. Garrett made a sound that was not a word. The thing that ran through the beam's edge and then out of it on the other side was a person, running, hunched, with that same hitching, uneven gait. And it was moving fast, faster than the infected individuals I'd seen in the South Bore, much faster, in the narrower space of the corridor where there were fewer obstacles. Kevin Straw let go of the door and backed away. The door swung on its hinges. Open, fully open. I got to the door at the same time as the running figure. My hand went to the door, my foot went behind it as a brace, and I pulled. The figure hit the door from the corridor side at the same moment I pulled it from the roadway side, and for a second, one specific, terrible second, we were both touching the door from different sides, and the door was at 90 degrees, and I could see through the gap. It was a man. Young, maybe 25. What had been a white-collared shirt was torn at the shoulder. He had no left shoe. His face was turned toward me, and his eyes were open wide, and they were tracking, not locked on me, but scanning, like someone looking for a sound source rather than a visual one. He hit the door again. My foot braced. The door came toward closed. I got my shoulder into it, locked. It took me 8 seconds to get the key into the damaged lock and force the catch back into the frame. The catch didn't seat fully. The frame had been warped by the pry job, but it seated enough that the door would hold against standard pressure. Standard pressure. I turned around. Garrett and Kevin Straw and the motorcycle man were standing 6 feet back, looking at the door. Kevin Straw's flashlight was still on, pointed at the floor. "Turn that off," I said. "Now." He turned it off. "You understand what you've just done?" I said to Garrett. I said it quietly. In the tunnel, quietly as plenty. Garrett looked at his hands. "I just wanted to see if there was a way out." "There is a way out. I told you that. And the route I've been working toward is now potentially compromised because whatever was in that corridor has been drawn to this position and the catch on this door is damaged, and I don't know how many other things in the corridor heard the noise you made for the 10 minutes you were working that door before I got here." He didn't say anything. "Okay," I said. "Here's what happens now. Go back to room C. Tell Rhett what happened. He'll know what to do." Kevin Straw said, "My daughter is in that car. She's 9 years old. I know," I said. "I understand. Go back." They went. I stood at the door for 5 minutes, listening. The catch was damaged but in place. On the other side, irregular impact sounds. 1. Pause. 1. Pause. Not continuous. The way they clustered at sound sources, then drifted when the sound stopped. I needed to relock this door, and I needed to do it with something better than the compromised catch. From my tool bag, I had a steel chisel that I could wedge under the bottom edge of the door against the concrete floor. It wouldn't hold against sustained pressure, but it would hold against the blind random impacts I'd been observing. I wedged the chisel, sat back on my heels, looked at the door. Then I heard something that made me stop. On the other side of that door, not impact sounds, not the irregular footfall of an infected individual moving toward the door. A different sound. Voice. Someone on the other side of that door was saying something. I put my ear against the door surface. Cold steel. The sound was muffled through the panel, but it was there. Can hear me, please. Is someone? A voice. Ragged, exhausted, terrified, but forming words, coherent words. There was a conscious, uninfected person in the maintenance corridor. I pressed my mouth against the doorframe gap. Hello, I said, barely above a whisper. Can you hear me? Silence. Then, yes. Oh God, yes. Don't make noise, I said. Speak as quietly as you can. How many of you are there? Just me. Just. I got in here through the south passage, the one near the crash. I've been in here since yesterday. I didn't know where to go. Is there anything behind you in the corridor? Anything following you? I don't know. I've been hearing things. I think there's more of them now, coming from the north end. There's light coming from the north end now, from under a door, and I heard them go toward it. The north end. The north blast door had a status indicator light, a small LED, red when closed. It was under the door frame on the corridor side, small but present, and it had apparently drawn infected from the north section corridor toward it. So the north section corridor had infected in it. I'm going to open this door, I said. When I do, you come through immediately. Don't hesitate. You may not get a second chance. Are you ready? A pause. Yes. I pulled the chisel out, opened the door 4 inches. Now, I said. She came through. Late 20s. Dark hair, loose. She was wearing a green fleece vest over a long-sleeved shirt, both dirty. She had a canvas bag over one shoulder that she'd kept with her through whatever she'd been through. She was shaking, not dramatically, the fine, continuous shake of a body that has been operating on adrenaline for many hours and is now cycling down. I got the door closed and re-wedged the chisel. She looked at me with a slightly unfocused expression. Are you from the tunnel? Maintenance engineer, I said. Nolan Price. Are you injured? I hit my head on something, I think yesterday. My ear's been ringing since then. She touched the right side of her head carefully. I'm okay. I think I'm okay. What's in the bag? She looked at it like she'd forgotten it was there. My research kit. I'm a PhD candidate. Biology. I had a field kit in my car. I grabbed it when I ran. She set the bag down and opened it, and I looked at the contents. Collected water samples in sealed vials, which were useless to us. A small notebook, a pencil, a multi-tool, plastic bags, zip ties, a compact water filter, protein bars, 4 of them, a small first aid kit, and something that made me look twice, a folded printout with a biohazard symbol on the header. What's this? I said. She looked at it. That's my research notes. I've been working on a paper about the Harmon virus strain. It's a bat-borne virus from the western ranges. I was tracking it for my dissertation. The reason I was on this road is I was coming back from a sample collection at a site about 20 miles east. She paused. I think the Harmon strain is related to what's happening. I stared at her. Are you saying you knew about this before it started? I knew about the virus. I didn't know it could. No one thought it was transmissible like this. The strain I was tracking was showing neural tropism in infected bats, some unusual behavioral modification, but in bats, not in. She stopped, pressed her lips together. The bat colony at the eastern site. It's about 2 miles from a government transport facility. I said nothing for a moment. The transport facility, I said slowly. It's a federal biologistics center. They move samples, materials. I don't know what else. I thought about the camera footage. The south section. I'd been so focused on the infected individuals spread through the stopped civilian traffic that I'd been assuming the outbreak started on the surface, in the city, spreading outward, reaching the highway. But the south portal was where traffic was entering the tunnel from the city direction. The infected had run into the tunnel from the south entrance, coming from the city direction. But what if they hadn't come from the city? I went back to room C and looked at the camera footage from the portal camera. The timestamp on the south portal camera, 4:21 p.m., just after I'd entered the tunnel. The camera showed the entrance, normal traffic. Then, at 4:23 p.m., two vehicles that were different from the civilian cars, larger, government plates. One of them, I could just make it out in the low-res image, had the specific configuration of a DOT-permitted transport vehicle, the kind that carries hazardous materials in temperature-controlled internal containers. The kind of vehicle that comes from a federal biologistics center. At 4:24 p.m. on the south portal camera, the transport vehicle had stopped at an angle, partially blocking the right lane. Partially, because it had been rear-ended by a sedan that stopped too late, and a figure had gotten out of the transport vehicle on the passenger side, and then another figure, and they'd moved into the tunnel. I stood at the camera monitor for a long time. The outbreak hadn't swept in from the city and reached the tunnel. The tunnel had been the point of origin. Whatever had been in that transport vehicle, or whatever was wrong with whoever was in that transport vehicle, had come out in the tunnel at 4:24 p.m. on Thursday, March 13th. I thought about the Federal Biologistics Center, 2 miles from a bat colony, where a biology PhD candidate had been tracking a virus with neural tropism. I thought about the emergency logs. Every tunnel authority maintains an emergency operations log, a continuous record of events, radio contact, gate status, automated system readings. The log for the Kelton Pass tunnel is stored on the control system computer in room C. The computer was on. It had been running on its UPS backup since main power had flickered and partially failed overnight. The log was there. I searched the log for the past 72 hours. There was an entry at 2:17 a.m. on Thursday, 14 hours before the outbreak, a radio contact from Tunnel Authority to an external agency, the record showing only a frequency identifier that I didn't recognize as standard DOT. The contact lasted 11 minutes. The content wasn't recorded. Radio conversations are summarized by the duty operator, and the summary field for this entry read, "Coordinated passage approved. Classified transport 8814. Medical emergency escort protocol in effect. Classified transport 8814. The transport vehicle on the portal camera, 2 people getting out. Medical emergency escort protocol. I sat in front of the computer for a while. Then I closed the log and thought about what it changed. Functionally, nothing. We were still in the tunnel. The infected were still here. What was on the surface was still unknown. Knowing that the outbreak had a point source in this tunnel, knowing that someone had pre-authorized a classified transport through here, didn't change the immediate physical problem. But it changed something else. It changed the question of what the surface looked like and why. And more importantly, it changed my estimate of how long we might need to wait before external help arrived. Because if this was a classified transport incident with government involvement, either help was already coordinated and was coming, or help was never going to come because the people who could have coordinated it didn't want to acknowledge what had happened here. I decided not to share the log entry with the group yet. There was nothing they could do with it except panic, and panic was already our second biggest problem after infected in the corridor. Her name was Ivy Larkspur, the biology PhD candidate. I know that sounds like I'm making it up. I'm not. She joined the Room C group and gave Judith the first, actually useful information anyone had had about what we were dealing with. Not how to treat it, not a cure, but behavioral parameters. The neural tropism she'd observed in the bat samples, the way the Harmon strain seemed to enhance auditory sensitivity and directional response while suppressing everything else, matched exactly what I'd been observing and tracking instinctively. They respond to sound. That's the dominant remaining behavioral system. Vision seems impaired. They respond poorly to light alone, but strongly to sound paired with light. Touch response is intact but non-functional for complex tasks, like door operation or object manipulation. Pain response appears suppressed. Suppressed how? Judith asked her. The bat observations showed they couldn't habituate to injury. They'd sustain damage and keep moving in the same pattern. The pain response that normally creates avoidance behavior wasn't. She paused. It's complicated. The short version is that they don't stop when they should stop. Walt said, so the only thing that stops one is injury significant enough to impair motor function. Ivy looked at him. Or destruction of the neural tissue that's still operational. She said it carefully, like she was describing a specimen. Walt nodded. He touched the holster on his hip in a very small gesture that I noticed, and filed away. The afternoon of day 2 was dominated by supply management, and by the increasing tension created by 51 people in a tunnel, with diminishing confidence in their situation. I moved through the civilian vehicles twice more, collecting food, conducting a full census of medical needs, and trying to project a calm that I didn't entirely feel. Morgan, the type 1 diabetic, was my primary medical concern. Her insulin was cold chain dependent, and the cooler she'd been keeping it in was still good, but wouldn't stay cold forever. Judith had assessed her current blood glucose using Morgan's own testing kit, and it was in range, but the stress of the situation was going to affect her metabolic stability in unpredictable ways. I also found, in the third pass, something I'd missed before, a catering van. It was parked sideways because the driver had tried to change lanes when traffic stopped and had gotten stuck diagonally. Inside the van, I had to break a door window to access it, which I did with my chisel and a fabric wrap to suppress the noise. Inside the van, there was what amounted to several hundred portions of catering food. This was a catering company's supply vehicle, apparently returning from a corporate event. Aluminum trays, each sealed, roasted chicken, some kind of pasta dish, bread rolls, multiple trays of various sides. Much of it was still warm from the insulated compartments. Some of it would deteriorate quickly without refrigeration, but sealed trays in a cool tunnel environment, I estimated we had 2 to 3 days of decent food quality before the meat-based items became a health problem. The dry goods in the van were the real find. 5-pound bags of mixed nuts, industrial-sized bags of individually wrapped cookies, boxes of protein bars, a case of water bottles, and, critically, 2 commercial-sized canisters of instant coffee, which I included in the return load, not for its own sake, but because caffeine management for a group that was sleep-deprived and stressed was a legitimately relevant variable. I made 3 trips with Rhett and Pete Galloway to bring everything to Room C. Pete Galloway, I was learning, was one of those people who doesn't have a great deal to say, but who does exactly what he says he'll do, and carries more than his share without being asked. He'd done 22 years of long-haul driving, and he had the specific quality of someone accustomed to solving the problems directly in front of them, without catastrophizing the ones that aren't there yet. When I needed something lifted, he lifted it. When I needed a count, he counted. He didn't editorialize. I liked him for that. The food inventory on the afternoon of day 2, with the catering van contents added, I estimated we had 7 to 10 days of food at rationed consumption for the group, assuming the meat items were consumed first over the next 2 days, and then transitioned to dry goods. Water was indefinitely available via the utility line, which continued to show clean, consistent pressure. By evening, we had something resembling a functioning camp, Room C as the base, the nearby vehicles as dormitory space. Several people had claimed cars as sleeping spots and were maintaining them. A food distribution schedule twice daily, a noise protocol that had been communicated to all 51 people and was, imperfectly, being followed. The watch rotation running, the ventilation at 40%, and me, sitting on the floor of Room C at 10 p.m., looking at the emergency exit map. The route was service passage at 0.8 miles, 1.4 miles of corridor north egress door. The problem was the 1.4 miles of corridor. I'd cleared it to 200 feet south. I didn't know what was in the remaining 1.2 miles. Ivy's assessment suggested the infected would track sound in the corridor, any sound. Walking through 1.4 miles of concrete corridor with 51 people was not a sound-neutral exercise. And I still didn't know what was on the surface above the north egress door. If it was worse than the tunnel, getting 51 people onto an exposed hillside would be a death sentence for some of them. What I needed was intelligence on both, the corridor and the surface. I also needed to think about the woman I'd seen on the south section camera, the one who'd been seated near the blast door. She'd moved, and I'd lost track of her. She was either somewhere in the south section, still alive and conscious, or she wasn't. That night, day 2 going into day 3, I slept for 5 hours, which was better. My shoulder hurt from the door encounter at the service passage. The right shoulder, which had taken the full weight of the impact through the door. I'd done something to the rotator cuff area that was going to be a problem if I needed full range of motion. I woke on day 3, Saturday, March 15th, with a specific urgency about the south blast door. I went to the camera monitor. The south section cameras. The 0.6-mile camera first. Fewer moving shapes. 5 visible. Either more of them had redistributed toward the south entrance, or they'd moved into the service passages. I checked the 0.85-mile service passage on my mental map. The reinforced gap should have been holding. I'd redirected the ventilation bypass so there was no whistle. Without auditory draw, they shouldn't be clustering there. The 1.1-mile camera, the one closest to the blast door. She was back. The figure seated against the wall. Same position. Left of the blast door, maybe 15 feet, back against the wall. I watched her for 10 minutes. She moved once during that 10 minutes. Her head dropped forward, then came back up. The posture of someone trying to stay awake and losing the fight. She'd been in there if she'd been there since shortly after the blast door closed, approaching 40 hours. I made a decision. I told Rhett. He didn't tell me it was a bad idea. He said, "What do you need?" "I need the 1.6-mile blast door to come back up, which means opening our section to the north again, which has implications. And I need to come up with a way to either clear the south section near the door or distract everything in it long enough to open and close the door quickly." "Can you do both?" "I can do one of them. Here's what I was thinking. The jet fans. I told you about the jet fans earlier. The longitudinal fans. The ones that push air along the bore axis. If I activate the jet fans in the south section, with the exhaust fans on maximum, I create a strong directional airflow toward the south entrance. Strong enough to be disorienting. Strong enough to make progress against it difficult for someone in that gait pattern. Anything in the south section gets pushed back toward the entrance. Can't fight the airflow effectively. Then I open the door briefly. Get whoever's near it through. Close it fast." Rhett was quiet. Then, "And the north section?" "I'll keep the 1.6-mile door closed. The north section is sealed from us. I'm not going north until I know what's there." "Then how does she get through?" "The woman by the door. If she's conscious and mobile, she walks, or is pulled, through the blast door while it's briefly open. The door takes 40 seconds to open, 43 to close. I need those 83 seconds to be clear enough that the window is usable." "Who goes with you to the door?" "Walt," I said, "and Ivy." "Walt, because I wanted the firearm as a last resort only. Ivy, because she could identify any ambiguous presentation. Someone who was sick but not yet fully transitioned. This is the thing I hadn't wanted to articulate yet. I was worried that the woman in the camera feed was not an uncomplicated rescue. I was worried that she was somewhere in a process that I didn't understand, and that bringing her through the door might be bringing a different kind of problem through. Ivy had a way to assess that. She'd explained it on day 2. The Harmon-strain neural disruption doesn't suppress all voluntary behavior at once. "There's a window," she'd said. She'd seen it in the bat samples, the ones that were transitioning, where complex task completion was degrading but wasn't gone, where an individual might be both genuinely in distress and genuinely a transmission risk. The behavioral tell she'd identified was specific. Infected at full transition, showed pupillary response only to sound, not to light. A flashlight in the eyes of someone fully transitioned produced no response, no blink, no constriction. Someone in early transition would still show a partial blink response. I'd given Ivy one of the LED flashlights and she'd added it to her kit. We went at 9 a.m. Getting the jet fans and exhaust fans in the south section operational required me to stay at the room C panel. I couldn't go to the blast door myself if I was running the control panel. This was the logistical knot. I gave Walt the master key and walked him through the blast door operation. He listened like he was taking an exam, asking me to repeat nothing, but asking one clarifying question. If it doesn't close on command, What do I do? There's a manual override crank on the right side of the door housing, I said. You need 45 turns clockwise to close it manually. Do not stop turning. Don't wait for me. Don't call for me. Just close it. He nodded once. Rhett went with Walt. Ivy went. I stayed in room C, with the door locked and my hands on the panel controls. Radio check, I said. We had one two-way radio from Pete Galloway's cab, a CB unit, handheld, that I'd confirmed worked on short range within the tunnel. Walt had the handset. I had the base unit connected to the panel via a jury-rigged auxiliary port. Ready, Walt's voice, slightly broken by the tunnel interference. Going to 05 fans now, I said. I activated the jet fans in the south section at 50%, enough to create significant longitudinal airflow without being so loud as to attract everything in the county. Then exhaust fans at maximum. The control panel showed fan operational status. Green, green, green down the row. Air's moving, Walt said through the radio. I can feel it. South section camera shows movement in the 0.6 mile zone, I said. They're reorienting. Looks like at least 4 moving toward the entrance. Door is approximately clear to 20 feet on the south side. Understood. Going to 100% jet fans. I pushed the fan controls to max. The humming in the tunnel became louder, a sustained, physical low-frequency pressure you could feel in your chest. And on the camera monitor, the south section cleared perceptibly. The shapes in the 0.6 mile camera zone moved, fast for them. The airflow was pushing, disorienting, and they were following it, reorienting toward the direction of maximum airflow, which was the south entrance. Door is clear, I said. Open now. I heard, through the radio, the hydraulic actuators starting, the distinct mechanical sound of the blast door beginning to move. Open, Walt confirmed. On the camera, the blast door, which was in the 1.1 mile camera's frame, showed the door panel moving, sliding sideways in its housing. The gap that formed between the door and the wall widened. The person against the wall was visible on camera. She hadn't moved at the sound of the door activating, which worried me. There's someone at the south wall, 15 feet from the door, I said. She doesn't appear to be moving. She might be unconscious. Static. Then Walt's voice. I see her. Going to her. Be careful. 30 seconds elapsed. I watched the camera. Walt and Rhett were visible in the camera frame now. On my side of the blast door, inside the south section. Walt went to the woman at the wall. He crouched. He and Rhett together got her upright. She seemed conscious. She was moving with them, not being fully carried. Ivy went in 3 steps ahead of them, back toward the blast door, watching the corridor behind them. I could see her hand going to her jacket pocket, the flashlight. 3 in the 6 mile zone moving toward the door, I said. You need to move. They moved. The woman was walking, lurching slightly, leaning on Rhett, but walking. 6 seconds to cover the distance to the door. Through, Walt said into the radio. Closing. I hit the close command. Blink red. Blink red. 43 seconds. Solid red. I sat back in the chair. My hands were shaking slightly, which I noted as information, and chose not to dwell on. We have her, Walt said. She's conscious. She's... A pause. Ivy's checking her. I waited. She's clear. Ivy's voice. Reaction present in both eyes. She's clear. I unlocked the room C door and let them back in when they reached it. The woman was Anna Pleck's cousin, it turned out, which was a coincidence that I didn't know what to do with. Her name was Dara. She was 41, and she'd been in the south section since the blast door closed. She'd hidden in the footwell of someone's car through the first night, listening. She'd made it to the blast door area when a gap in the infected movements had opened on the morning of day 2, and she'd stayed there because she didn't know where else to go, and she could see the camera LED blinking. She'd seen the camera. She'd known someone was watching. She'd pressed her hand flat against the door at one point. She told me this very quietly, not pounding, just pressing her palm flat, trying to make contact through the steel, the foot in the pale blue flat. That had been her shoe. I went to the utility sink and let her drink water for a long time. I gave her 3 crackers. She ate them and didn't speak for 20 minutes, and I let her not speak. Day 3 was also the day we found the other group. I'd gone into the maintenance corridor through the 0.8-mile service passage in the early afternoon, intending to scout further north. Pete came with me this time. I wanted someone with physical strength rather than investigative ability. And Pete Galloway, at 58 years old, was a big man who moved carefully. We went north along the corridor, past the 200-foot mark where I'd previously scouted, into territory I hadn't assessed. At the 0.6 mile from the north egress mark, the corridor makes a slight jog east to accommodate a geological feature. There's an intrusion of harder rock that the corridor was routed around during construction. After that jog, the corridor straightens again. I was in the jog section, around the corner, when I heard something. Voices. Ahead. I stopped, put my hand up for Pete. We both went still. 2 voices. No, 3. Speaking in low tones. Not panicked. Conversational level low. I moved closer. The corridor was fully dark except for my flashlight, which I was keeping aimed down at the floor to minimize light emission forward. The sound was coming from a specific point ahead. A room, probably. One of the equipment rooms that are built into the maintenance corridor at intervals for storage and junction box access. I got within 10 feet of what turned out to be an equipment room door. The door had a strip of light at the bottom. Someone had light in there. I knocked. 2 raps. Paused. 1 more. The standard maintenance corridor entry signal, which anyone who'd been in this system before would know. Silence inside. Then movement. Then the door opened. The man who opened it was in his mid-30s, wearing a hard hat, which told me immediately that he was in the tunnel system professionally before this happened. He looked at me and Pete, and then at the flashlight, and then back at me. "You maintenance?" he said. "Engineer. Nolan Price. State DOT. You're a tunnel worker?" "Electrical contractor. We've been in here since Thursday afternoon." He stepped back and opened the door wider. The equipment room was larger than room C. It was a junction room, a room that exists in the corridor where major cable runs converge and where high-voltage switching equipment is mounted on the walls. It was about 30 by 20 feet. In it were 8 people. 8 people who'd been here since Thursday. Since the day the outbreak started. In the maintenance corridor, in this room, with the lights from the junction equipment and what looked like a camp they'd assembled over 2 days. Sleeping areas marked off with gear. A collection of water from a drip collection point they'd rigged from a condensation pipe. Food that was running low. Very low. 3 workers in hard hats and reflective vests. 5 civilians who'd apparently found the maintenance corridor through a service passage before any of the corridor passages had been closed or locked. The electrical contractor's name was Jeff Bauer. He was competent, calm, and immediately deferential once he understood who I was, which was both useful and a sign of how much the situation had worn him down. He'd been managing 8 people with dwindling food and no knowledge of what was in the rest of the corridor or outside. I told him about my group, about room C, about the blast doors in the south section and the north portal situation, about the north egress door. "Have you tried the egress door?" I said. "We got to within 100 feet of it," Jeff said. "There are infected in the corridor between here and the north door. We tried going past them once and had to turn back." "How many?" 5, 6, moving around. We've been staying here." "Were they there from the start or did they move in?" "Second day. Came from the north end of the corridor." So the north egress door, the one I was counting on to get everyone out, had infected between it and the junction room, which meant they'd come through the north egress door, or they'd come from the tunnel through a service passage near the north end. I checked my map. There were 2 service passages near the north end, one at mile marker 1.8 and one at mile marker 2.0. Both were in the section north of my 1.6-mile blast door, which meant they connected to the north section of the tunnel, which I'd sealed but hadn't cleared. The infected in the corridor had come from the north section tunnel via those service passages. "Are those passage doors open?" I said. "One of them is," Jeff said. "We tried to close it, but we couldn't get close enough. So the corridor between me and the north egress door had 6 infected individuals moving in it, with at least one open service passage allowing potential access from the north tunnel section above us. And the north egress door itself. I asked Jeff about this directly. He looked at me for a moment before answering, which told me the answer wasn't going to be simple. There's a problem with the door. Tell me. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a maintenance log page, not a digital log, a physical handwritten note, the kind that gets taped to equipment during work. He handed it to me. The note was written in the specific telegraphic style of a maintenance crew noting completed work. It read, North egress. Door inspection and seal 310s. Frame wear point C7 identified. External barrier plate installed per contract spec. Internal operation verified pre-installation. Post-installation internal operation. Pending reinspection. March 10th, 3 days before the outbreak. External barrier plate installed. I stood there with this piece of paper in my hands. External barrier plate, I said. Jeff said, someone welded a steel plate across the outside of that door. We found it when we tried to push it from the inside. It opens okay to the first click, the latch releases, and then it stops. Won't go further. How heavy is the plate? Can't tell from feeling. It's solid. We tried pushing together, 3 of us, and nothing moved. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not in despair, I want to be clear about that. I closed them because I needed to think without visual input. The emergency egress door had been sealed from the outside 3 days before the outbreak, by a maintenance crew following a contract specification. The classified transport authorization, the government plates on the camera footage, the biologistics center 2 miles from Ivy's bat colony. Someone had prepared for this, not for the specific outcome. You don't prepare for 51 civilians trapped in your tunnel, but someone had been operating in advance of an event they anticipated, and one of the things they'd done was seal the emergency egress point of the maintenance corridor. Is there any other way out? Jeff asked me. I looked at the map. There was a second egress point on the south end of the maintenance corridor. A mirror image door, south end, opening onto the hillside above the south portal. To get to it, I'd need to go south along the corridor, past my 0.8-mile service passage junction, all the way to the south terminus of the corridor. That door had been installed in 2006, during the South Portal Expansion project. I didn't know if that door had been sealed from outside too. Possibly, I said, but we have another problem. I looked at Jeff. Your situation just changed. I'm bringing my group here. The decision to merge the 2 groups was not universally supported. In my group, the primary concern was noise. Adding 8 people to 51 made the sound management problem significantly harder. In Jeff's group, the primary concern was resources. They'd been hoarding their remaining food for 8 people, and now they were talking about sharing with 51. Rhett managed the food conversation. I'm not going to describe how, exactly. It was a combination of directness and the kind of moral clarity that comes from someone who has spent a lifetime being fair in practical situations and has no patience for small-minded calculations in existential ones. By the time he was done talking, the food was pooled. The new problem was moving 51 people from the tunnel roadway through the 0.8-mile service passage into the maintenance corridor. The service passage was narrow, 4 feet wide, 25 feet long. This was going to take time, and it was going to make noise, and I needed to think carefully about sequencing. I also needed to reassess the south egress door, and I needed to deal with the 6 infected individuals in the corridor between the junction room and the north egress door. 3 problems. The order mattered. I took Ivy and Walt into the corridor on the morning of day 3 to scout the 6 infected between the junction room and the north door. We moved north from the junction room carefully. The infected in the corridor were navigating in the dark. No light in this section. They were operating on sound only. In near darkness, moving in stockinged feet, we'd removed our shoes for the corridor transit, a protocol I'd established with all parties. We were able to locate all 6 without being detected. They were distributed along a 200-foot section of corridor, about 400 feet south of the north egress door. They moved slowly in the darkness. Without sound to track, they were essentially wandering, covering the same area in long looping patterns that sometimes brought them close to each other and sometimes separated them by 60 or 80 feet. Walt had his sidearm. I'd had a conversation with Walt the night before about deployment conditions. My position, the firearm, was the absolute last resort, not the first tool. Because in the corridor, the sound of a shot would be catastrophic. It would pull everything within hearing range toward us, which, in an echoing concrete corridor, could include things from sections we didn't know were populated. The only conditions under which Walt would use the weapon were direct contact imminent, no avoidance option, only to clear an immediate individual obstruction to passage. He'd agreed. He was a former deputy. He understood what I meant about the sound, and he agreed. We watched the 6 in the corridor for 45 minutes, tracking their patterns. What I was looking for was whether the pattern had any rhythm, any regularity that would create a predictable window of passage. It didn't. The patterns were genuinely random. I couldn't time them. But there was a physical constraint I could work with. The corridor had a utility vault at the 400-foot mark, a widened section about 30 feet long, where major conduit runs were housed. The vault was on the south side of the 6 infected's current range. If I could get the group to the vault position before attempting to move past the 6, the vault's alcoves would provide some spatial buffer and give us a staging point. And if I could create a sound distraction that drew all 6 north, away from us, we'd have a window. The question was, what distraction? In the north end of the corridor, behind the 6 infected, was the egress door that was externally sealed. Behind that door, the open hillside. What was out there I didn't know. But I knew the egress door itself made a sound when operated. The latch mechanism. The door panel if it moved even slightly. If I could remotely trigger that door mechanism, create a sound at the north end. You can't trigger a mechanical door remotely. But you can create a sound at a distance using the ventilation system. The maintenance corridor has 2 ventilation points, small duct connections near each end that allow air exchange with the external environment. The north ventilation point is a metal grill set into the north corridor wall near the egress door. That grill has a damper, a metal flap that opens and closes with ventilation cycles. The damper makes a specific sound when actuated, a metallic clack, brief, sharp. I could operate that damper from the room C panel, remotely, open, close, creating a series of distinct sounds at the north end of the corridor. Back at room C, we'd come back to brief. I ran through the plan. Corridor to vault, wait for damper signal, move past the 6 while they're drawn north, south along the corridor to the egress door. Assess whether it's sealed. If it is, further planning. If it isn't, we have our exit. And if the infected are faster than we think, Garrett said. They're not faster than us in open space, I said. They have a compromised gait. What they have in their favor is, they don't get tired. We need to be clean and clear on the first pass. Dennis, the husband of the pregnant woman Faye, raised his hand in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Judith's earlier meeting room gesture. Faye can't be in the corridor. He looked at his wife, who was seated against the wall looking tired and calm, in the specific way of someone who has decided to trust others with logistics. She's 7 months. The passage is narrow. The floor isn't even. She'll go first, I said. And she goes through first, when the way is clear. She gets the best path with people on both sides. She doesn't carry anything. Faye looked at me. I can carry things. I know you can. You don't, because we need your hands free for balance, and I need you on the move fast if something changes. She accepted this, without arguing. The full group transfer from the roadway to the maintenance corridor through the 0.8-mile service passage took 1 hour and 40 minutes. 1 person at a time through the passage, assembled in the corridor in the junction south section, then staged in the junction room and the adjacent corridor space. I went first with Red and Pete to set the route. Faye went fourth, with Dennis on one side and Walt on the other. Morgan with her insulin cooler went immediately after Faye. Elderly Bernard went slowly and with help. Caleb went without being told to, and was through the passage before I'd finished briefing the next group. The anonymous woman in the red windbreaker, Angie, who I'd promised I'd try to help with her mother on the other side of the south blast door. I thought about her throughout this. She went through the passage without speaking, carrying a single bag, and took up a position in the corridor and waited. Dara, who'd been on the south side of the blast door for 40 hours, and who was still not fully steady, went through supported by Jeff Bauer, who'd appointed himself her functional assistant. 59 people total, my original 51 plus Jeff's 8. In the corridor, staging in sections to manage noise levels, in the dark, with flashlights pointed at the floor, speaking only when necessary. The jury-rigged camp from the junction room was broken down, and the usable supplies, the drip-collected water, the remaining food, Jeff's electrical contractor tools, which included a pry bar and some cable ties that were immediately useful, were distributed into the group's carry load. What I was carrying in my jacket, the map, the master key, the inspection manual pages I'd pulled from Room C's binder, my phone, no signal, battery at 31%, and the maintenance log printout with the classified transport notation that I'd folded into my inside pocket. At the vault staging point, I stopped the group. North of us, corridor, dark, 6 infected wandering. South of us, corridor, also dark, but cleared by my previous scouts to the junction room and southward. First priority, south egress door assessment. Because if that door was also sealed, I needed to know before I committed the group to a corridor position with infected to the north and no exit to the south. I took Rhett and Ivy and went south, while the rest of the group held at the vault. 200 meters of corridor. 300. The south terminus of the maintenance corridor was marked by a change in the floor, from aggregate to poured concrete, a visible transition even in flashlight. The door was there, red steel, the same configuration as the north door. Larger emergency placard, handle and push bar. I pushed the push bar. The latch released. The door moved, swung outward, freely, 3 feet, and stopped at its travel limit against the doorstop. No external plate, not sealed. The opening revealed darkness and a smell of air. Outside air, cold with something in it that I couldn't identify right away and then identified as smoke. Distant smoke, not immediate. And beyond the doorway, the hillside, rock face on the left, scrub vegetation, a gravel service path going east, no infected visible, no vehicles. Just the hillside in the dark, with a faint orange glow somewhere beyond the ridgeline that I took to be fires on the highway surface. "It's open," Ivy said quietly. "Yes," I said. We stood there for a moment, looking at the outside world. The cold air coming through the door smelled like ash, and something else I couldn't name, and didn't want to try. The orange glow on the ridge was steady, not flickering, which meant it wasn't an active burn. It was the reflection of fires burning on the other side. I held the door and listened. Wind. Something distant, indistinct, nothing immediately close. "We can get them out," Rhett said. "Not yet," I said. He looked at me. "I need to know what's on the other side of that ridge before I send 59 people onto an exposed hillside in the dark. And I need to address the infected between the vault and the north door, because if we leave them active in the corridor while we're moving the group south, they're a variable I don't want at my back." He was quiet for a moment. "You're going to use the tunnel." He meant the ventilation system. He'd been listening long enough to understand how my thinking worked. "Yes," I said. "I need to go back to Room C. Room C is back through the service passage into the tunnel roadway." "I know," which has infected in it. "I know that too. The north section, the section beyond the 1.6-mile blast door, had some infected in it. I'd seen one, the man in the gray jacket, before I'd closed the door. There could be more, but the north section was only 0.6 miles long, and it was between 2 sealed points. The 1.6-mile blast door and the north portal, which was physically blocked by crashed vehicles. The crashed vehicles at the north portal were blocking the tunnel entrance. Vehicles don't block a tunnel entrance perfectly. There are gaps between crashed cars, spaces that a person could squeeze through, spaces that an infected individual, not understanding the concept of a gap, would not necessarily navigate. They'd cluster at the blockage point, at the nose of the crash, because that's where the sounds from outside were loudest. If most of the infected that had been in the north section were clustered at the portal crash point, and the south end was my 1.6-mile blast door, the center of the north section might be relatively clear. I was guessing, but it was an informed guess, based on observed behavior. I went back through the service passage, alone. I told Rhett to hold the group at the vault, and not to move north for any reason while I was out. The 0.8-mile service passage, unlocked, through, into the tunnel roadway. The north section. Dim emergency lighting, stopped vehicles, no visible movement in the immediate 50 feet. I moved carefully south. South in the tunnel was north toward the junction, which is confusing, but bear with me, toward room C. Moving along the shoulder, one hand on the vehicle sides for orientation in the dim light. Past vehicles that had been abandoned, doors open, bags left on seats, the detritus of a rapid exit. At mile marker 1.3, I saw 2 infected individuals in the roadway ahead, both moving, both oriented north, toward the portal. I stepped behind a large SUV and waited until both had moved past, going north, and then continued south. Room C, key in the lock, inside. The ventilation control panel. This was the system I'd been thinking through since the corridor. My plan: use the jet fans and exhaust fans in the north section to create maximum longitudinal airflow toward the north portal, pulling every infected individual in the north section toward the crash point. Then open the 1.6-mile blast door briefly to allow anyone in the north section who was not infected to move through. There might be civilians in the north section I hadn't reached, people in their cars, and then close the door again and hold the airflow long enough for my group to make their south corridor move. Simultaneously, I'd use the south section jet fans to push everything in the south section toward the south entrance, which would reduce the infected population in my old center section and prevent any movement through the south service passages toward the maintenance corridor. Running both simultaneously was within the system's capacity. I'd been monitoring the power status. The backup generator feeding the emergency circuits was at 68% fuel remaining. The fan systems drew significant power, but not catastrophically so. I estimated I had 4 to 6 hours of generator life for full fan operation. 4 to 6 hours was enough. I ran through the sequence at the panel. I radioed Red on the 2-way. I'd brought the base unit with me. "I'm at the panel," I said. "Going to activate north section fans in 30 seconds. When I give the signal, move your group south along the corridor to the south egress door. Wait there. I'll meet you." "Understood," Rhett said. 30 seconds. I activated the north section jet fans at maximum. The sound was immediate and physical. A deep bass pressure change you could feel through the floor. Then the exhaust fans at maximum, pulling toward the north portal. I had no camera coverage of the north section. Those camera feeds had been offline since the main power flicker, so I was operating blind on the north situation. Then the south section fans. Maximum jet fan, south direction. Everything in the south section pushed toward the south entrance. I waited 60 seconds. Then I opened the 1.6-mile blast door. Yellow, blink red, but reversed, because opening goes the opposite direction. The door was opening. I stood to the side of the room C window and watched through the glass. The north section, visible in the dim emergency lighting through the window, showed a strong directional wind now. I could see it in the way a piece of paper on a dashboard across the way was fluttering in the airflow. And I could see movement, figures, moving north in the tunnel, in the direction of the airflow, being pushed, or following the sound of the portal, or both. I saw 6 figures in the visible range from the window, all moving north, none moving toward room C. I spoke into the radio, "Move now. South corridor to the egress door, move." Then I grabbed my tool bag and left room C. I locked it, protocol, even now, and moved north in the tunnel toward the 1.6-mile door, which was now open, to see what was in the north section that hadn't moved out. Any civilians. At mile marker 1.5, near the door, I found 2 people. They were in a compact car with the windows up, huddled in the back seat, despite the front seat being empty. A man and woman, both middle-aged. They stared at me through the glass with expressions I recognized. The specific expression of people who have decided that stillness is survival, and who are having difficulty updating that assessment in the face of a person telling them to move. I knocked on the glass. "I'm with the tunnel authority. There's a way out. You need to come with me now." The man lowered the window an inch. "Is it safe?" "No," I said, "but it's safer than staying here. The generator running the emergency systems in this section has limited fuel. When it runs out, you'll have no light, no ventilation, and no working control systems. You need to move." They came out. Their names were Bob and Linda Marsh. They were from Eastern Ohio, on their way to visit their daughter in the city, which was the most mundane backstory I'd encountered yet, and it hit me somewhere odd. Bob and Linda Marsh from Eastern Ohio who just wanted to see their daughter. "Stay behind me," I said. "Don't run, don't talk, follow." I got them to the 0.8-mile service passage and through into the maintenance corridor. Then south, moving fast now. I could hear the fans working above us in the bore, a reduced sound through the rock, and I knew the sound was doing what I needed it to do, but I didn't know for how long. At the vault staging point, the corridor was empty. Rhett had moved the group south as instructed. I moved Bob and Linda south at a jog. We came out at the south egress door 40 minutes after I'd first arrived there. The door was open. Rhett had propped it with a rock. Outside, the hillside in the gray morning light, because it was now almost 7 a.m. on day 3, the sun just touching the ridgeline above us. I counted the people coming through the door. Rhett was at the count, clicking off on his fingers. 59 plus Bob and Linda made 61. 61 people outside, on the hillside, in the dawn. It wasn't over. I knew it wasn't over. Because the infected in the corridor, the 6 between the vault and the north door, were still in there, and I had the fan systems running at max in the main bore, and the generator had a limited life, and none of that mattered if the surface was impassable. I stepped outside and looked. To the west, the highway. I could see it from the hillside vantage, the 6-lane surface road that the tunnel fed into, running west through the valley. It was bad. There were vehicles stopped and crashed at multiple points along the visible stretch. There were fires, 2 of them, a vehicle fire about a quarter-mile west, and a larger structure fire further in the distance that was burning orange and slow in the morning air. And there were figures on the highway, moving, the same hitching gait, visible even at 300 yards. But the hillside itself, for as far as I could see in both directions, had nothing moving on it. The service path that I'd seen through the egress door ran east along the base of the rock face, following the contour of the ridge, east of the tunnel, away from the highway, away from the figures on the road. Ivy was standing next to me, looking at the same view. "East," she said. "East," I agreed. The fire access road along the ridge goes about 4 miles before it intersects with a county road. If the county road is clear, is it likely to be? I don't know. The county road serves mostly agricultural land, low traffic, low population density, less likely to be a concentration point. I was thinking out loud, and she was letting me. "What's your plan for the tunnel systems?" she said. "The fans, the generator." This was the thing I needed to go back for. "I need to return to room C," I said. "I need to switch the fan systems to the automated schedule and trigger the tunnel's automated barrier sequence. There are 2 things the automated system can do that will help anyone behind us. It can run the fans on a timed cycle that maximizes air quality for a longer period without human operation, and it can trigger the automated emergency barriers, which will close all 4 doors in sequence and lock them in their closed position. That means anything still in the tunnel is contained. And anything not yet out," she said quietly. I looked at her. Yes. The south section had civilians behind the south blast door. I knew that. Angie knew that. Her mother was there. Other people were there. I couldn't get them out from here. The south egress door opened from inside the maintenance corridor, and the corridor didn't connect directly to the south section, only via the service passages. which were now either reinforced or compromised. Going back through the south blast door meant going back through infected territory with resources I didn't have. But the automated system running the fans would keep air quality viable in the south section for another 20 to 30 hours. And the door barriers, the south blast door, would remain in place, keeping the infected contained and not adding to the south section's population from the main bore. It was the best I could do for them from outside. It wasn't enough. I know it wasn't enough. I told Rhett what I was doing. He told me 61 people weren't going anywhere without me, and I told him that wasn't accurate. Ivy had the map, Jeff Bauer had tools, Walt had the firearm, Pete had the physical sense to keep people moving in the right direction. They had what they needed. "Don't be stupid about it," Rhett said. "I'll be 30 minutes," I said. "Take the group east on the service path. Move slow and quiet. I'll catch up." He looked at me for a long time. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, which was the shoulder that was already hurting, and squeezed once and let go. I went back through the egress door. In the maintenance corridor, south end, moving north through the dark, past the junction room, past the vault, into the 6 infected zone. No fans running in the corridor. The sound of the main bore fans was attenuated through the rock, but audible. The 6 infected were distributed through the corridor ahead. I could hear them, the occasional scuff of movement, a low, irregular sound from one direction. I moved along the east wall, in the dark, one hand against the wall. No flashlight. In the dark, with my hand on the wall, I'm a different person than I am in light. I know this tunnel. I know the dimensions. I know where every junction and room entrance is by feel. The change in the wall surface, the position of conduit boxes, the smell of different sections. I'd been moving through maintenance spaces like this for 11 years. I felt the conduit box at the 1.1 mile junction. The vault section was 10 feet ahead. I moved through it, into the clear section north of the vault. Something moved, to my left, close. I stopped. Breathing, right there, maybe 8 feet. I held completely still. 8 feet, in a 4-foot wide corridor, meant 4 feet of lateral distance. Enough that if I pressed against the right wall, they'd be pressed against the left, and we might not make contact. A scuff. Movement, not toward me, but laterally. The infected individual crossing the corridor from left wall to right. I felt the displacement of air. I pressed hard against the right wall. The figure moved past. A foot away, I could feel its presence in the air displacement, even without seeing or touching. Moving north, toward the fan sound from the main bore. I breathed. Continued north. 0.8 mile service passage. Key. Through. Into the tunnel. Room C. I sat at the panel. Automated schedule for the fans. I keyed in the parameters. Alternating 40% and 80% cycles at 4-hour intervals. Prioritizing Zone D, which covered the south section. Battery backup life remaining at 61%. On the current schedule, I estimated 14 to 16 hours of automatic operation before the system would need external power. The barrier sequence. In the emergency operations panel, there's a guarded red switch with a cover plate that reads, "Emergency barrier lockdown. Authorized personnel only." I'd known this switch existed for 11 years. I'd tested it once, 2 years ago, when we were doing a full systems verification. When activated, it sends a close and lock command to all 4 blast doors in the south bore and all 4 in the north bore. The doors close. Then the hydraulic actuators lock in the closed position. The sequence takes approximately 3 minutes to complete. Once locked, the doors require a physical key, a different key from my master key, a key that exists in the Tunnel Authority Control Building at the North Portal, to reopen. From the inside, there's a manual emergency release that requires significant physical effort to operate. Activating this sequence would lock everything in the tunnel in place. Infected in the south section, contained behind the south blast door. Infected that had migrated from the north section, contained in the north section between the 2 doors. The south section, civilians, still there, with filtered air for the next 16 hours, but contained. I picked up the handset and tried the DOT emergency channel. Static. Tried the state emergency management frequency. Static. Tried the county sheriff channel. Broken static. Then, for 3 seconds, 3 distinct seconds, a voice. All available units. County Route 7. Repeat. Do not use the highway. Static. County Route 7. That intersected with the fire access road east of the tunnel, about 3 miles east of the service path exit. Someone was on the county channels. Someone was operating. I flipped the cover plate on the emergency barrier lockdown switch. Held it for the required 5 seconds. The sequence started. I heard and felt the hydraulic systems engaging throughout the bore. Not loud, but present. The specific deep sound of massive mechanisms moving. On the panel, door status lights went from their current states to blinking red, one after another. I watched them close. South board door 1, closed and locked. South board door 2, closed and locked. North board doors, the same sequence, which I couldn't verify visually, but the panel confirmed. 3 minutes and 40 seconds after I'd activated the sequence, all 8 barriers were closed and locked. Everything in the tunnel was contained. I sat for a moment, then I stood up. Looked at the room one last time. The panel I knew as well as my own hands. The fluorescent lights that had been flickering since 1994. The utility sink with the cold mountain spring water. The emergency cabinet that I'd restocked 8 months ago, and that had, in its restocked form, helped keep 61 people alive for 3 days. I turned off the lights, locked the door, walked north through the tunnel. My section, the center section, was now isolated. No infected present, just stopped cars in the dim emergency lighting, just the hum of the automated fan system. Past mile marker 1.4, past 1.5. The tunnel curved slightly, and I could see the blast door at 1.6 miles in the distance, solid red on its status panel. I went through the 0.8-mile service passage for the last time, into the maintenance corridor. South through the dark, past the junction room, past the vault, through the 6 infected section. They were still there, still moving, but I was quiet, and the fans in the main bore were pulling their attention north, through, to the south end. Out the egress door. The hillside. Forning light, fully up now. The service path going east. No one in sight. Rhett had moved the group, as I'd asked. I started east along the service path. It's a gravel path, maintenance vehicle width, cut into the hillside above the highway. On my left, rock face. On my right, the slope down toward the highway surface, which was visible below me, and what was on it, which I'd already seen from the egress door, and didn't need to look at again. I kept my eyes on the path ahead. The smoke smell was stronger out here. The air had that specific quality of air that has been through fire somewhere nearby, dry and slightly acrid, and carrying particles you could feel if you breathed through your nose. I breathed through my nose. Better to know what's in the air than to be surprised by it. I went east for 20 minutes before I found them. Rhett had stopped the group at the first significant cover point on the path. A section where a rock outcrop on the left created a natural shelter, partially screened from the highway below. 61 people distributed through the shelter, sitting or standing in the rough groupings that had formed over 3 days underground. Faye sitting on a flat rock with Dennis beside her, eating something. Caleb standing at the edge of the outcrop looking east. Pete Galloway and Jeff Bauer talking. Ivy at the back with her notebook open, writing. When I came around the corner, Rhett was at the front. He looked at me. Then he looked past me at the empty path behind me. Then back at me. Done? He said. Done, I said. He nodded. The county radio, I said. I heard a county channel. Route 7, 3 miles east. He pulled out a compass from his jacket pocket. Rhett Coleman, who carried a compass, because that's exactly who he was, and oriented east. That way. That way, I agreed. We started moving. The service path intersected with a fire access road after about a mile. The fire access road went northeast, switchbacking up and over the ridge, which I hadn't anticipated. I'd expected it to run along the base of the ridge, but it was a summit crossing road, built for aerial equipment access during forest fire operations. That meant a climb. We climbed. Faye climbed, with Dennis, and she did not complain, which was something I'll remember. Bernard climbed slowly, and Pete walked with him, matching his pace. Caleb climbed like his body had forgotten it had been in a tunnel for 3 days, which was a teenager's specific metabolic gift. The summit of the ridge gave us a view. To the west, the highway, the tunnel portal, the crashed vehicles at the portal entrance, and the stopped vehicles stretching back into the valley, and at the far end of the highway visible stretch, a city skyline with 3 distinct columns of smoke rising straight up in the cold morning air. To the east, the valley on the other side of the ridge, County Road 7, visible as a gray line through agricultural land, fields, farmhouses, a grain elevator near the County Road intersection. No visible movement on the road itself at this distance. No fires. And at the County Road, at the intersection where Route 7 met the fire access road, there were vehicles, 2 of them, parked at the intersection, with what I could see at this distance were flashing yellow lights, the kind of lights on emergency utility vehicles. And people, standing by the vehicles, moving in a purposeful way that was completely unlike any movement I'd seen in the tunnel for the last 3 days. Uninfected, organized, responding. I don't know who they were yet. When I got down to the county road, when all 61 of us got down to the county road, I found out they were a county emergency management crew that had been running rescue checks on rural roads. Not the cavalry. Not a government response. 2 guys with emergency utility experience and a pickup truck and a county vehicle who'd been doing what people do in a crisis when the official channels are down. They'd driven around and looked for survivors. One of them was a county road maintenance supervisor named Gary, who shook my hand with both hands and said nothing for a moment because he was looking at 61 people coming down a fire access road from the tunnel side of the ridge, and there was nothing adequate to say. "You came out through the maintenance corridor," he said finally. "South egress door," I said. He shook his head. "We didn't know that door was operational. The north door. Had an external barrier plate," I said. "I know." He looked at me differently after that. "Your dot?" "Maintenance engineer, Kelton Pass." "Nolan." He said it like he knew me. I didn't know him, but that's not unusual. DOT people know each other by work location in a way that doesn't require personal acquaintance. "There are people still in the south section of the tunnel," I said. "I don't know the count. The automated fans are running and will continue for approximately 16 hours. After that, air quality degrades. Whatever resources you have. We're working on it," he said. "We've been trying to coordinate a south portal approach, but the surface down there," he gestured west, toward the highway, "we can't get vehicles through. We've been working on a different angle." "The south bore maintenance egress," I said. "It's accessible from the hillside above the south portal. There's a path." "Show me on a map," he said. I pulled out my map. We stood at the county road intersection with the map between us, and I showed him everything. The south bore maintenance corridor, the south egress door, the route along the hillside, the blast doors and their current lock status, and how to get them open from the south portal control building if the power could be restored. He took notes. He was taking notes before I'd finished the first sentence. While this was happening, the 61 people from the tunnel were being processed, that's the only word I have for it, by the county crew. Water, some food from the truck supplies, which was limited but present. Communication equipment was available, a satellite unit that could send messages if not voice, and Gary's radio, which had county channel contact. Judith immediately went to work on medical triage and was quickly joined by the 2 county crew members who had basic first aid training. Dennis and Faye were the first priority. Faye was examined and Gary's partner, a woman named Clyde, which was apparently her nickname. I never got her actual first name. Clyde had worked as a paramedic EMT for 6 years before moving to emergency management, and she assessed Faye with the efficient competence of someone who has worked under pressure and knows what matters. Faye was fine. The baby was fine. Faye's blood pressure was elevated, which Clyde noted and said was expected under the circumstances. Morgan, the type 1 diabetic, was next. Her insulin was checked, still viable, still cold, though the cooler was beginning to warm. Clyde had a medical kit in the county vehicle that included glucose monitoring supplies compatible with Morgan's system. Blood glucose, manageable. Good news. Bernard, with his anticoagulant medication, was assessed and was in better condition than anyone had a right to expect for a 75-year-old man who'd spent 3 nights in a stopped car and then walked over a ridge. Caleb sat by himself on a rock near the county road and looked at his phone, which had no signal, in the way teenagers look at phones regardless of signal status, as if the act of holding it and checking it might eventually produce the outcome you're hoping for. I went and sat near him, not too near. After a while he said, "My grandparents." I know. He didn't say anything else. I didn't say anything either, because there wasn't anything that would have been true and useful to say. And I'd rather say nothing than say something that was either true but unhelpful, or helpful but not true. We sat there, the two of us, while the county road crew worked and the rest of the tunnel survivors found each other, and the morning moved toward afternoon, and I thought about what I'd seen on the way through the tunnel, and what I knew from the log, and what I suspected about the classified transport, and what Ivy had told me about the Harmon strain, and the biologistics center, and what the smoke columns over the city meant, and what the absence of state or federal emergency response meant. What it meant was, the tunnel had been the beginning, not the end. Whatever had come out of that transport vehicle at 4:24 p.m. on Thursday afternoon had not stayed in the tunnel, because infected individuals had been running in from the south entrance by 4:30, which meant the surface had already been affected before the tunnel outbreak became a tunnel problem. The city was already in it, and the city to the west, and the region, and however far it had spread in 3.5 days on a highway network designed for maximum speed of travel. Whatever was beyond the county road to the east was going to be different, less dense, more time, different odds. Rhett came and sat with me and Caleb, and after a while Pete came, and after a while Ivy came and sat cross-legged on the ground, with her notebook in her lap, not writing, just being there. Gary came over with his radio. "I've got a county shelter operational at the Route 7 and 44 junction," he said. "About 9 miles east, former agriculture center, has its own well and generator. We've got about 120 people there already. I can get your group there in 2 runs with the vehicles." He looked at me. "You should come. They could use someone who knows how the infrastructure works." I thought about that. An infrastructure person. Someone who knew how systems worked. Who could look at a shelter facility and know what the water pressure meant, and whether the generator's fuel draw was sustainable, and how to extend the electrical capacity with limited means. Who could walk through a space and know it in a way that might keep people alive. "Yeah," I said, "I'll come." I looked east, down the county road. The fields were brown from winter. The grain elevator was still and silent. A red-tailed hawk was doing something high and slow above the tree line in the east. The air still smelled of smoke from the west, but there was something underneath it. Cold, clean, the specific smell of agricultural land on a cold morning. That was the first neutral smell I'd encountered since the tunnel. I looked at Rhett. He was already looking at me. He had a faint expression on his face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same general territory. 9 miles east, he said. 9 miles east, I said. We got up. "I want to tell you something. Before I finish this." While we were staging in the maintenance corridor, the long wait at the vault while the groups moved through, I had a specific 40 minutes of nothing to do but hold my position and listen to the corridor. And in that 40 minutes, I did something I normally don't let myself do during an operational situation. I thought about the choices. Not the choices I made in the tunnel. Those are what they are. I made the best calls I could with the information I had, and I'll let people who weren't there judge them however they want. What I thought about was smaller. I thought about closing the south blast door at 0.4 miles at 4:32 p.m. on Thursday, knowing that people were behind it. 40 seconds. Yellow. Blink red. Solid red. There were people behind that door. There still are. If the 16-hour fan window held and Gary's team got to the south maintenance corridor in time. I think some of them are alive. I think the cars provided enough shelter, and the blast door held, and the automated fans kept the air viable long enough. I don't know. What I know is that if I hadn't closed that door when I did, there's no version of this account that exists. No 61 people on a hillside, no county road, no hawk over the eastern tree line. And I know that's cold comfort for the people behind the door who didn't know why a blast door closed on them at 4:32 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon when they just wanted to get through the tunnel and go home. The county road, when we started moving east on foot while Gary shuttled the first vehicle load ahead, was quiet. No vehicles. A crow sitting on a fence post that watched us pass with no particular alarm. The sound of feet on cold asphalt, people's breath in the cool air. I walked in the middle of the group. I'm not a front walker. I'm a systems person. I think better in the middle, where I can see both what's ahead and what's behind and what's on both sides, where I can monitor multiple inputs simultaneously. My phone said 31% battery, and the time was 9:47 a.m. The date was Saturday, March 15th. I'd entered the tunnel on Thursday at 4:19 p.m. I'd been inside for 65 hours and 28 minutes. My shoulder hurt. My feet hurt. I was hungry in a specific way that rationing had extended over 3 days until the hunger was not acute but permanent feeling, a baseline state. I was tired in a way that sleep hadn't addressed, because the sleep I'd gotten had been too short and on concrete. I thought about Donna. I had no idea where she was. I had no idea if Marsh Creek Road was in the zone that had been affected, if the agricultural country east of the tunnel was far enough from the city to have remained clear, if our house was standing. I thought about her standing at the kitchen counter Thursday evening, trying to reach me on my phone and getting nothing. I thought about her decision point, what to do, where to go, whether to wait. Donna doesn't wait. She decides and she acts. She would have left the house Thursday night. She'd have gone east, because east is away from the city and away from the highway, and she knows enough about my work to know that a tunnel incident on the main highway would back traffic up in all directions. She'd have taken the county roads east. She'd have taken the emergency kit from the hall closet, the one I'd assembled 2 years ago after a bad winter storm had convinced me we needed to be more prepared, and she'd have taken the car and gone east. East. County Road, Route 7, 9 miles east to the Agricultural Center shelter, with 120 people already inside. Maybe. The hawk was still up, far ahead. It banked and disappeared behind the tree line. I kept walking. The first vehicle load had gone ahead. Gary came back in 20 minutes and loaded the second group. Faye went in the second load. Bernard, Morgan, Caleb, the older passengers, and the most medically significant ones. Rhett and Pete and I walked. Ivy walked next to me with her notebook, and she said something I want to write down because I keep thinking about it. The neural signature of the Harmon strain, she said. The sound tracking behavior, the suppressed pain response, the preserved locomotion with degraded complex function. She was thinking out loud, the same way I do. In the bat population, the affected bats lived significantly longer than expected. The infection preserves the host's locomotion, because locomotion is how the virus spreads. It needs the host mobile. How long? I said. In bats, the behavioral modification lasted weeks. In humans, she stopped. I don't have data on humans. I'm extrapolating. Weeks, I said. Potentially. But the strain also showed thermal sensitivity in the bat data. Affected bats avoided high temperatures. They clustered in cool environments. The tunnel was cool, I said. Yes. We walked in silence for a moment. So outside, I said, on warm days, in sunlight, when temperatures rise. In the bat data, thermal stress caused accelerated degradation of the affected neural tissue. The behavioral modification became less consistent, shorter tracking responses, eventually non-functional locomotion. She paused. I don't know if it holds for humans. I'm speculating. But if it does, then spring works against them, I said. She looked at me. March 15th. Cold now, but spring was coming. Speculating, she said again. But yes. We walked. I want to be honest about what I know and what I don't. What I don't know, whether the people in the south section of the tunnel were reached in time, whether Gary's county crew made it through the maintenance corridor before the fans failed, whether Angie found her mother, what happened in the city, how far the outbreak had gone by the time I came out of the tunnel on Saturday morning, whether the classified transport records I'd photographed on my phone with 31% battery would matter to anyone, or whether the Federal Biologistics Center and the sealed egress door and the 11-minute radio contact at 2:17 a.m. would ever be acknowledged. What I know, there were 61 of us on that county road at 9:47 a.m. 61 people who were in a tunnel on Thursday afternoon and got out. A maintenance engineer, a retired contractor, a truck driver, a nurse, a sales rep, a former deputy, a biology PhD candidate, an electrical contractor, a pregnant woman, a 16-year-old kid, a veterinarian, a chemistry teacher, a woman who never told us her name, a woman who'd spent 40 hours on the south side of a blast door, a man from eastern Ohio who just wanted to see his daughter, and dozens of others. A ventilation system that I'd been maintaining for 11 years, blast doors that I'd tested once, in a drill, 2 years ago, a master key in my jacket pocket. The 9 miles to the shelter took us a little over 3 hours on foot, stopping twice for rests. The county road went through a small town, unincorporated, maybe 400 residents, a gas station and a feed store and a church that appeared mostly emptied but not destroyed. No visible infected on the main street when we passed through. 2 dogs sat in front of the feed store and watched us. One of them followed us for about a mile before turning back. I thought about what I knew about the county around us. I'd driven these roads. I knew where the substations were, where the municipal water tanks sat on their tower foundations, where the volunteer fire departments kept their equipment. Infrastructure, the skeleton of a place. Useful knowledge in the situation we were all now in. The shelter at Route 7 and 44 was an agricultural center, a large metal building complex, the kind used for farm equipment storage and county fair exhibitions. Its own well, submersible pump, 220-gallon bladder tank. Generator, diesel, with a farm diesel supply in a bulk tank outside that I checked first when we arrived. 1,400 gallons remaining, which at the shelter's current consumption was approximately 12 days of power. Manageable, improvable. Gary met us at the gate. The shelter had established a simple perimeter, agricultural fencing reinforced with whatever was available, which was rustic but functional. He looked at the group coming in and then at me. 112 more people, he said, counting. 61, I said. We picked up more on the route. He looked tired. You sure you're infrastructure? I'm infrastructure, I said. The first thing I did inside the shelter, before I did anything else, was find a place in the main building with a clear view of the door, and I sat down. Just sat. On a hard plastic chair that someone had set up in rows, the kind of chair that's in every county exhibition hall in every agricultural county in the country. Cold, slightly sticky, terrible for your back. I sat in it, and I did not move for 22 minutes. Then someone touched my arm, a hand on my arm, gentle. I looked up. Donna. She'd arrived at the shelter Friday afternoon, she told me later. She'd gone east on Thursday night, exactly as I'd expected. She'd been at the shelter for 15 hours before we came in from the county road, trying to get information about the tunnel through Gary's radio contacts, unable to get through. She was wearing her garden center work jacket, dark green, Pinecroft nursery stitched on the left chest, and she had a streak of dried mud on her right forearm, and she looked like someone who had been moving steadily for 2 days without sleeping enough, which she had. She sat down in the chair next to me. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she said, "You look terrible." "I know. Are you hurt?" "Shoulder. It'll be okay." She looked at my shoulder with the specific evaluating look she gets when she's deciding whether to take something seriously or defer it. "We'll deal with that later." "Yeah." Another silence. "How many?" she said. 61 came out through the maintenance corridor. Maybe more from the south section if Gary's crew gets there in time. She nodded. She was doing the math. She's always doing the math, counting things, figuring inventory. The skill that runs an unpredictable seasonal nursery through 11 years and counting. 14 diesel generators in the county fair equipment, Gary told me, she said, most with fuel. I've been making a list. I looked at her. She pulled out a notebook, her own notebook, the small orange one she always carries in the garden center for stock notes, and showed me the first page, generator models, estimated fuel capacity, estimated power output, water source assessment, storage inventory, the kind of list someone makes when they're deciding whether the situation is manageable or not. I've also been talking to a woman named Ivy, she said, PhD student. She explained some things about the infection, about temperature and timing. Spring, I said. Spring, she agreed. It wasn't a plan yet. Spring was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks of diesel and well water and agricultural fencing and whatever came along the county roads from either direction. 6 weeks of Rhett handling people and Pete lifting things and Judith managing medical problems and Walt's firearm as absolute last resort, and Caleb growing up faster than any 16-year-old should have to, and Ivy writing in her notebook and 61 other people figuring out how to be useful in a situation that required something different from everyone. 6 weeks. I put my hand over Donna's hand, the one with the notebook in it. Through the metal walls of the shelter, far away and somewhat muffled by distance and the ridgeline behind us, there was a sound I recognized. The automated fan cycling in the tunnel, audible even from 9 miles if the wind was right and the air was cold and you knew exactly what you were listening for. It was running. The fans were still running. I sat there and I listened to it until it faded into the wind and I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The county radio contact at 0947 hours that morning had mentioned Route 7. The crew that found us was 2 people with a county utility vehicle. The satellite message unit they had allowed a 140-character burst transmission every 90 minutes on the emergency frequency. Gary had been sending position updates and survivor counts since Thursday night to whatever remained of the state emergency management network. He didn't know if anyone was receiving. He kept sending anyway. That's a specific kind of faith in systems that I recognize. You do the thing the system is designed for, even when you can't confirm the system is listening. You keep the signal going, because the alternative, stopping, doesn't help anyone. I understand that completely. The Kelton Pass Tunnel automated fans ran for 15 hours and 40 minutes on the backup generator, after I activated the automated schedule. I know this because Gary's crew reached the south maintenance corridor at approximately 4 p.m. on Saturday, through the south egress door, navigating the corridor with equipment and good flashlights. They found 4 infected individuals in the maintenance corridor. I'd been wrong about the 6. 2 of them had migrated back through the service passage, and they dealt with them with the specific methods that emergency management crews in that situation dealt with them, which I'll leave undetailed because the detail isn't the important part. The south blast door, manually operated from the control building at the south portal after a portable generator restored power to the portal junction box, opened at 6:22 p.m. Saturday. There were 23 people in the south section. 19 of them were alive. Among them, Angie's mother. Among them, the man who'd put Psalm 91:7 on his window decal and had an argument with me about running his engine. Among them, a family of 5 who had spent 3 days in a large SUV, playing quiet board games and rationing crackers. 19. The other 4, I don't know their names. Gary's team recorded them and I asked him once and he told me, and I'm going to keep that information to myself, because it's not mine to broadcast. They were 4 people who had been in stopped cars near the south entrance when the blast door closed, who had been reached by the infected before they could shelter effectively. 19 out of 23. That's the number I'm working with. 80 people total, from the Kelton Pass Tunnel civilian convoy, 61 through the maintenance corridor, 19 through the south portal on Saturday evening. The south blast door, once opened, was relocked by Gary's crew after clearing the section. The north portal remained blocked. The tunnel, my tunnel, was sealed, both entrances blocked or closed, with whatever remained of the infected population contained inside it. I'll go back someday. I know I will. Not yet. Not until there's a reason and a plan and the resources to do it properly. But I'll go back, and when I do, I'll take the master key that's still in my jacket pocket, and I'll walk back through the space I know as well as anything I've ever known, and I'll check the integrity of the blast doors and the condition of the ventilation system and the deferred maintenance list items that were supposed to have been addressed and weren't, and I'll write it all down in an inspection report the way I have done 500 times before. I'll note the gap at the top right corner of the 0.85-mile service passage door frame, which we reinforced with steel plate, but which should be properly repaired. I'll note the corrosion in the lighting ballast at illuminated zone 4. I'll note the condensate drain in room C that needs cleaning. I'll note the classified transport authorization logged at 2:17 a.m. on March 13th, and the external barrier plate on the north maintenance egress door, and the sealed status of the south bore as of 4:24 p.m. March 13th, and I'll write it all down in the sequential, dry, specific language of a maintenance inspection report, and I'll file it in the appropriate place, and whoever needs to find it will be able to find it. That's what I do. That's what I know how to do. My shoulder took 4 weeks to recover fully. The rotator cuff strain was confirmed as a partial tear by a medical team at the regional field hospital that was established at the Route 7 and 44 shelter in the second week. It healed without surgery. I wore a sling for 12 days and complained about it less than Donna thought I would, which she noted, which told me she'd been paying attention to how the situation had changed, the way I moved through the world. Faye delivered her daughter 7 weeks later at the shelter, with Judith assisting and the field hospital's OB physician present. They named her April, which was both the month and a specific kind of hope. She had all 10 fingers and all 10 toes. She had a lot of dark hair. She was loud, in the specific way of healthy newborns, and the sound of her crying in the shelter that night was the loudest uncontrolled sound anyone had made in weeks, and nobody said a word about it. Caleb's grandparents were not reached in time. He knows that. He's been here at the shelter since March, and he's working through it, the way you work through something when there's no other option. He's helped with the generator maintenance, which he has an aptitude for that surprised me, and probably surprised him. He's 17 now. He's going to be useful in a world that needs people who are useful. The Harmon strain's thermal sensitivity. Ivy published her preliminary observations through the emergency research network that the university system had established in the third week, a digital distribution network on whatever servers remained operational, reaching researchers and medical people still functioning across the region. The response was significant. 3 other research groups had been tracking similar strains independently. The consortium that formed from those conversations is working on formal documentation. Spring came in April, earlier than average. The temperature climbed. On the county roads and the surface highways visible from the shelter's eastern fence line, the pattern of movement changed. Slower, less consistent. By mid-April, isolated and uncoordinated. By late April, Rhett and Walt and 2 other men went out in the county vehicle on a scouting run along Route 7 and came back reporting that the road was clear for 12 miles in either direction. The world was not fixed. It's not fixed now, but it is, different from what it was in mid-March, when the temperature was cold and the tunnels were full and everything was at its worst. I think about the blast door often, the hydraulic sound of it closing, the way the status indicator goes yellow, then blinking red, then solid red. 43 seconds. It's a very short time to make a permanent decision. I'd make the same call. I'd make it again in the same 43 seconds, with the same information I had. And I'd still think about Angie's mother on the other side, and the other 4, and the 23 who stayed behind while 61 went forward. I'd think about them, and I'd make the same call, and that's the specific weight of being the person in the room who knows how the systems work, and who has the key. It's not heroism. Heroism is for people who have a choice about whether to engage. I was already in the tunnel. I already knew the control panel. The key was already in my pocket. You just do what you know how to do. You close the door. You count the fans. You walk east.